Hey, good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the City of Lake Forest Park City Council regular meeting for Thursday, September 22nd, 2022 to order. And just quickly, I wanted to mention for those of you who are watching this online that we are having some camera difficulties. So you get to see all of us in the aggregate, but you won't get to see all the fun automatic camera work out and about in the council chambers. And we apologize for that inconvenience. And with that, I wanted to start with, again, I am not the mayor. I sometimes play him on TV, I guess, as his stunt double. We're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Fertani has very graciously offered to lead us in the pledge. Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fertani. And with that, do I hear a motion for adoption of the agenda?
I'd like to propose an amendment.
We have to move the agenda first.
Let's move the agenda first. I move to move the agenda.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved in second. Yes, please, your amendment.
I'd like to propose an amendment to split the citizens' comments, public comments into two sections. Have one that's prior to the presentation, so that'd be between 4 and 5. Public comment that we were not able to do for the budget session that we just had in the work session. And then the balance to be for other public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Fertani. Do I hear a second for amending the agenda?
Second.
And we'll now take a vote on the amendment, or actually we can just take it a vote on the agenda as amended. What's your pleasure, council? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Aye. I get to vote as well. The ayes have it. Thank you, everyone. It is amended, is adopted as amended. And with that, we have a lot of special guests here tonight and celebrating a very special person. And I have asked Councilmember Riddle to read a proclamation honoring Rosie Schaffer. I thank you all for coming tonight. And we have members of family, volunteers in the community, from the emergency response teams. And we thank you very much for coming to celebrate this special individual. Councilmember.
Thank you. Whereas as of September 2022, Mrs. Rosie Schaffer has dedicated more than 20 years to serving the citizens of Lake Forest Park and its neighboring communities. And whereas Mrs. Schaffer started her service volunteering for the Emergency Services Coordinating Agency and continued to serve through numerous organizational shifts via the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Services, RACES, Community Emergency Response Team, CERT, and the North Shore Emergency Management Coalition, NEMCO. And whereas during her service, she spent countless hours conducting routine radio checks, connecting Lake Forest Park neighborhoods during weekly check-ins via local ham radio nets, preparing the Emergency Operations Center's radio room and equipment for effective emergency communications when needed. And whereas Mrs. Schaffer further volunteered as an engaged member of the leadership teams of both the RACES and CERT organizations, as well as spearheaded the creation and management of NEMCO's Community Outreach Committee. And whereas through these efforts, she has enabled the creation of educational newsletters, informational flyers, and various other materials aimed at recruiting new volunteers, improving the knowledge and experiences of those already volunteering, as well as increasing the level of preparedness of her community at large. And whereas Mrs. Schaffer has been a shining star of volunteerism, maintaining a steadfast demeanor of the utmost approachability, combined with a wonderfully positive attitude, regardless of circumstances. And she continuously exudes an amazing ability to build quality relationships and teams. Whereas she has served the citizens of Lake Forest Park and its neighboring communities with honor, dignity, and professionalism for over 20 years. Now, therefore, the mayor and the council of the city of Lake Forest Park do hereby officially recognize and express the deepest appreciation to Mrs. Rosie Schaffer for her commitment to the citizens of Lake Forest Park and for dedicating a life of volunteer service to the public. Signed this 22nd day of September 2022.
Chief, please.
Emergency manager. Real quick. addition to the proclamation that we just read, we had also gotten like a plaque for Rosie to celebrate all of her input to the community and everything she's just done to volunteer for citizens of both Lake Forest Park and Kenmore, and then kind of just improve our services for decades of dedicated work. And obviously, we hope that this would have kind of come in a little more timely, but at the same time, it's a good time to celebrate everything she has done for everyone.
Thank you so much. I recognize almost half the people in the room here who are also volunteers, many of them of similar service. So thank you so much. Thank you very much. You would be very happy.
Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, we are going to be moving on to citizen comments regarding the budget because we were unable to have citizen comments during the last work session. So if there is anyone out in the public, in the council chambers or online that would like to sign up to speak, Matt, I believe we have someone online here that would like to speak. Let's see. Let's start with Mr. Keast. Can you hear us okay?
I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan.
Are you ready to go?
Please.
Okay, yes, thank you. And these are comments on the budget. I very much appreciate the city making hard copies available, and I took advantage of that. I'm going to work from front to back, but I cannot identify page numbers. The public copy doesn't have it. So if you just follow along as best you can, hopefully I'd appreciate that. Starting with the mayor's budget message. The mayor, the second paragraph talks about expenditures exceeding revenues by $1.2 million. This is kind of becoming endemic in our city. And as I walk through a little bit further, we'll try to get a little bit specific on that. But and I don't see that number appearing later on in the budget. There are other different numbers, so there's a reconciliation issues there. But it does say in the end of that paragraph, we were able to cover the ongoing expenditures with the one-time revenues, but really that's not the case. It is a reserve drawdown as well as one-time revenues to capture that $1.2 million short out of balance notion. And let me just carry on here. Now, then if there's a page, the title at the top of the page is, let's see, community profile. I want to comment on that in the second paragraph because I think there's a little bit of a misconception. The first sentence is Lake Forest Park is considered a full service local government, and then goes on to talk about the full range of services, so on and so forth. I think that's not an accurate statement. If you go back into the 1980 history, the Lake Forest Park, when it was founded, had the responsibility of fire services and library services, as well as what you see today. In the 80s, the government went to the people, asked the people to relieve the city of the fire responsibility. The people agreed to do it. Then in the 90s, the government went to the people and asked them to relieve the government of the library responsibilities. The people agreed to do that. So the city no longer has those responsibilities, but it kept its revenue streams intact. The bargain, or essentially the notion was at the time that with those relief of those two major budgetary items, the elected officials would then run the city within the revenue streams available to all cities. And so that, I think by the time this gets finalized, it'd be nice if that could be clarified. A couple of pages further, there's a page headed Summary Financial Management Policies. You come 2/3 of the way down, it says Long Range Financial Planning. It says the primary tool for long-range financial planning is the 6-year financial forecast that includes projected revenue and expense for 6 years, beginning on the first day of the current biennium. There is no real discussion of the 6-year forecast in this proposal. And so, yes, that is accurate, but it's up to the council to basically make that come alive. And in recent years, the council has been going all the way to final action without a final 6-year projection. Now, it's difficult because the county has its own rhythm about when it creates numbers. Nonetheless, I would ask the council to be alert to this, that both the public and the council need to be looking at the implications of this over the 6-year cycle, that is city policy, and not wait until December 15th or December 20th and then magically look at those numbers for the first time. Going further deeper into this, let's see, there's a page called Consolidated Financial Schedule, when you look at that page, you'll see at the top, the beginning cash balance, and at the bottom, the ending cash balance of the general fund. And that number there shows a drop in the general fund by the end of December 2024 of $934,533. That is a consumption of a one-time consumption of a reserve of 12%. If you use the mayor's figure from the mayor's message, it would be $1.2 million. That would be a drop of 19%. Point about this is that this is not sustainable. This is contrary to what the 6-year forecast policy is set up to do, is to get the city on a glide path. This proposal is not a glide path. And so I would hope that the council would step back and take the 6-year philosophy seriously and make the adjustments necessary. The mayor's budget does indeed include also consuming some one-time, well, not one-time, but some federal dedicated revenues for the Recovery Act is still within this budget and still leaving these shortfalls, even though the federal government produced a windfall that's being captured into this budget proposal. Now let's go over to, oh yeah, and for example, on the revenue page, it says the ARPA fund is coming in at $998,000 during the 2-year period of time. So that's in the 23-24 budget, federal revenue sharing. If you go to page 37, schedule of fund balances, well, no, let's skip on that. So I would just want to summarize by saying that, again, I appreciate the council sharing it. I'll try to follow along with your deliberations and see if there's any other way I can be helpful to you. But this thing is not on a glide path. And for 10 years, it has not been on a glide path, and hopefully the council will take some proactive action and put it on a glide path of stability, as the citizens hoped it would be when they agreed to annex to library service district into a fire district. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Case, for your comments. Let's see. Next we have, and do we have anybody in the audience that wanted to present that was signed up for who the chief is? Oh, the chief is here. Was there anybody? Did you see? Just want to make sure. And this is on the budget. There's opportunity to talk about sound transit and or other topics during the regular comment period here after our presentations.
There is, but it's for other.
Okay, thank you, Chief. I just want to make sure we weren't preempting someone here. I appreciate that. Mr. Tonkin, can you hear us, Jack? Mr. Tonkin?
Tonkin, you need to unmute yourself.
Is that better?
There you are.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Jack.
I admit that I'm a little fuzzy on the issues of transfers. It's been 50 years since I sat on council, but I would like to know on the fund transfers, my bottom line question to those are, can those monies be used or borrowed for the purposes of balancing the budget? And I would like to see, if that's the case, a history of those fund balances to understand what impacts those balances have had from transfers in case they have been brought down to a level of concerns. And then I would like to have some access to that. And the only other comment that I have is I totally agree on the 6-year forecast. We've been asking for that for a long time, have not got it. It's not clear to us why, and it's not clear to us to go through what you presented, get it for any way for us to discern what that process is. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tonkin. Let's see. At this time, is there anyone else online that would like to make public comment about the budget? Please use the raise hand function and we can call on you. Good, a second here. Okay, I think with that we will, pardon me, I'm losing my voice. It has nothing to do with the smoke. It's probably all the talking I've been doing up here. With that, we'll close public comment. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughtful comments. And now we're going to move on to presentations, and we're going to start with the Community Mobile Crisis Response Agency, and that is City Administrator Hill. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, Council. Got to wait for my presentation to come up. We have individuals online. Supposed to have some people in the audience too from our coalition of cities, but hang on.
And while Mr. Hill is getting ready, I just note this is the largest crowd we've had in City Hall by a factor of about 15 for months. So thank you all for being with us. With the other folks, it's about by a factor of about 50. So
Not since before the pandemic, if
That's
we
right.
had this many people.
my
So
apologies, Mr.
I'll
Hill,
try and make
please.
this a good presentation. Online, I do know that Karen Reed, she's the consultant facilitating the interlocal agreement process between the 5 cities, I believe. And since there's Karen, I can see
Hi,
Karen. Deanna Gregory, I believe, is out there as well. She is with Pacifica Law. She has led the legal review of the proposed interlocal agreement. Articles of Incorporation. Brooke Butner is here as well. She is our program manager for the radar program. And then our city attorney, Kim Adams Pratt, who has done legal review on the city's behalf for the interlocal agreement before you today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the constructs of this agreement, what it means to the city at a fairly high level. The way this is put together, and I want to thank Kirkland because they put together a nice presentation that I was able to spring off of. Walk you through each section and then take a moment of pause to see what questions, concerns, clarifications you would like, because at the end of the day, by the 26th, I think, sometime next week at least, all of the cities will present it to their city councils, the interlocal agreement. And then our next step will be to go back as a negotiating team of the 5 cities and take all the comments from all the city councils and see how we can integrate those into the ILA as it sits today. So just for a reminder, North Sound Radar is kind of mental health, people in crisis outreach that goes out with our police departments. The 5 cities are Bothell, Kenmore, Kirkland, Shoreline, and Lake Forest Park. Currently, this is it is a grant-funded program. It's a quite small program. And as we've gone through many of the social unrest that we have over the past several years, not starting with George Floyd, but I think culminating there is just understanding that there is a need for that expertise in the field. You've heard testimony from our police chief in the past of the benefit of the radar program to them as they go out in the public, and the cities recognize that there is a need to take this beyond the small program that it is, with not a lot of availability of the radar navigators, and get this to a full program, 24/7 coverage that our police department can rely on to be there for them. So let's get started. And see if I push the right button. I think we need to go down. Oh, blew it already. So just to kind of put this at a high level, we're looking at creating a regional continuum of behavioral health services. So there's always someone to call, and in the past that's been 911. This year 988 came, and that is a dedicated service for people experiencing crisis, whether it's mental health, it's substance use, suicide prevention. That is that one number that everybody can call. And the someone to respond, that's currently the radar program, or Community Mobile Crisis Response Agency is the name that is taken as we morph this into a larger entity. And then there will be the someplace to go, which on October 13th, I'll be back before you to talk about the crisis, the County Crisis Response Center at the north end of King County. The same 5 cities are together in a coalition. We've been working with a provider to come into the state and provide those services. There's no cost to the cities on this. They are self-funded through grants and their own means. Medicaid, Medicare, et cetera. But we need to put this whole continuum in place because currently to date, your options are, for the police department, we take them to jail. Where are we taking people? The emergency room, they're not truly getting the services that they need every time. So moving on. Got to remember it goes down. Won't dwell here a lot, but this is your negotiating team, Karen Reed, consultant, leading the charge of this, Deanna Gregory, as I said, legal counsel, and then the city managers, city administrator in our case, some management analysts from a couple cities, as well as Brooke, have gotten together over the past several months to put together the interlocal agreement that we have before you tonight. And one thing I'd like to say is it's been a very good group to work with. Everybody understands one another. You have 5 different city councils and mayors who have some differences of ideas of how this program should work, how it should be rolled out, how quickly, can we get to a more robust program where we have the ability to understand when we need to send police or when we can just send navigators. How soon police can cut loose from a call and leave the navigators to continue to work with the individuals. And so as we walk through this, here's some policy considerations, kind of questions to be asked of you. The proposal is that this would be an independent nonprofit agency, and we'll go through the reasons why. We've got the governance structure. We'll go through the proposed program, staffing and funding structure, kind of at a high level. There's more detail in the ILA. The weighted voting and new membership provisions. Weighted voting obviously is a very big concern when you're the city of the smallest size. We've constructed this on a pro rata share, and at 5.73%, we're pretty small. So we want our voices to be heard, but we also don't want to be the tail that wags the dog. And then on the other end, Kirkland being the largest city, they don't want a bunch of little cities ganging up on them. So we'll show you how that weighted voting works. And then just get your general feedback on the draft ILA. So as you may have noticed, if you've read through this, there's 34 sections. It's a long document. We'll go through these in chunks. So the first section we'll go through is the goals, structure, and services. And that includes the creation of the Community Mobile Crisis Response Agency. The term of the agreement, this first agreement term would be for 6 years. We want a commitment. This is no small task, no small undertaking. And so we need the commitment of the principals as they are today. And I think we've seen that dedication just with the radar program. Definitions, agency goals, services, and powers. And so the primary goal obviously was to adopt a community response model where mental health professionals are the primary responder to community members in crisis where appropriate. And that where appropriate likely will change over time, as the system becomes more robust. Some of you have looked and seen the CAHOOTS model that's in Oregon. That's been around 30 plus years. Very robust, understand their community, understand their whole integration with police and navigators and when they can send, who they send out and when. But it also, as I mentioned earlier, gives the ability to, when the police officers feel that it's secure and then navigators agree, police can go off and do what they need to do and let the navigators stay and address the rest of the situation. Other objectives was to come up with a governance model. Is it city managers or elected officials or a combination? How do we get community members with lived experience in the crisis care system involved? 24/7 operations objective. Like I said, it's grant funded to this point, and moving forward, the cities will contribute to that funding. But as this grows, how do we, what other sources are available? Because as we know, everything costs, and costs continue to go up, and how can the cities afford to keep this going long term? Then the weighted voting structure, fiscal and administrative agent. To date, Bothell is the fiscal agent, an administrative agent. All the employees are Bothell employees. Then they're loaned to the radar program. Going forward, you've seen in the ILA that the fiduciary would become Kirkland, and the employees would become Kirkland employees, then loaned to this agency. Other objectives, proximity to all member agencies. You know, we don't want all of the navigators shoved in one corner of this city coalition. Integrating the 988, 911 dispatch. And then if it's successful, how do other adjoining cities become part of this agency? So as I mentioned, the 5 cities are proposing that this is formed as a separate independent agency as a nonprofit. The reason for this is, and I put it up there, it fits the scope and size of the agency. This agency won't be issuing debt, and then the risk and liability rests with the agency and not the individual cities. There were considerations looking at joint boards like ARCH and public development authorities. Those just really don't fit the scale of what we're doing and the needs. So that's why we are recommending the nonprofit, and this goes to recommendations from Karen and legal counsel that this really truly does fit best for this organization. So that's our first pause. Are there any comments, questions, concerns, anything you would on this portion that we need to take back to the larger body? Just as the nonprofit. The other thing that I can tell you is as far as liability and insurance issues, right now our radar navigators are self-insured and then they're reimbursed by the program. We have approached WCIA of providing that insurance coverage through the pool. It sounds like that is something that they are in favor of doing and are taking to their board. We just have to wait for that action, but then that would be something that would be provided through the agency.
Colleagues, what's your pleasure? Questions, comments for Administrator Hill? Councilor Riddle.
Perhaps just some more clarification on the interplay between being a nonprofit agency, but then employees of the city of Bothell or Kirkland as that transit. Just trying to understand that a little bit more.
I may have to lean on Karen on this, but so they're employees of the city, but then they're loaned to the program. Karen, I don't know if you can give me a little bit more depth on how that works.
Yeah, sure. Good evening, Mayor and Council. In order to avoid having to stand up a whole separate administrative structure with personnel policies and all the attendant obligations when one is technically an employer, the plan here is to do what a number of other similar nonprofit corporations that we formed with King County cities have done, which is to engage one of the member cities as the fiscal agent. They will do all the bookkeeping and the legal oversight, and they will also be the host employer for these folks so that the folks are technically on the payroll of that city, but the budget of the agency supports those costs. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but I'm happy to take another stab at it.
I think it does. I think I'm now thinking like just, that relationship and understanding, if policy changes at the city, how does that impact the nonprofit, and just kind of getting more into the weeds later about what that starts to look like. I think that's an explanation enough for this stage.
Yeah, and as you look through the ILA, the policies of that employer are the policies that those employees follow. I think if there was maybe a policy at that, Kirkland being that employer at this point in time, that caused concern for the executive board or the elected officials of the other cities, that's something that could be brought up in that executive board to discuss during that time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Riddle. Colleagues, any other questions at this point? We can certainly come back if you think of something later. Okay, Mr. Hill, please.
Moving on. So governance, we'll get into the governance structure. So this covers the executive board composition, and there's an operations board, public records, advisory groups, principals assembly, which is elected officials, and we'll get into that. Covers the hiring of the executive director, and then personnel policy. So the executive board, the way that this interlocal agreement is constructed is I think we should just say, we could say 4 city managers and 1 city administrator is what that is. and then a non-voting liaison from the operations board. So that operations board is a multidisciplinary board. That would be your police chiefs, your fire chiefs, your like 911, 988 individuals from those. And then it also has language in there for any other entities, agencies that might make sense to have on that operations board. So to that executive board, you have that non-voting liaison from the operations board, because you don't want an executive board out there who's making all these decisions that don't really work for the boots on the ground. You know, how does that affect the interaction between the navigators and the police departments and the fire departments? Make sure you're keeping an eye on that. And then you get down to the community advisory board, and this is always a very highly recommended that you have individuals who have lived experience, whether you're talking homeless shelters where you have somebody who was previously homeless in your community advisory board, or someone who in this instance has been through a crisis care system. They bring a different light to that discussion and things that you likely are not going to think about as you're making decisions. So, and then the last one would be the principals assembly, and this would be a representative from each of the principals elected body, meet at least once per year. And this would be to review the budget and the policies of the agency, and then to make recommendations to the executive board. If it was seen fit that there was some recommendation that came from the elected officials of the operations or the budgetary concerns, as it may be. So I'll back up, because the question at this point is there anything in with this proposed governance structure that brings you any concern, questions? So.
Councilmember Lebo.
Thank you. I'm not quite following on the principals assembly. So if I understood, the executive board is 4 city managers and a city administrator. The principals assembly, there is 1 vote per principal.
Correct.
It's not clear to me that there are more than 5 principal members,
Correct.
and that it actually doesn't prescribe how often they meet here, other than it says from time to time. And it's not clear to me what the purpose of the principals assembly is. If in fact all the actions are taken by the executive board, what's the value of having another group that actually doesn't have anything other than recommended value?
So, yeah, I mean, to the first question, our understanding would be that they would meet at least once per year. They could meet more often. I think the idea is to have that elected body kind of overseeing. You're signing, all of these elected bodies would be signing off on what's here today. And as we get into the voting, by a supermajority vote, the executive board can make some changes to how this is working. Hopefully, those city managers, administrators are coming to their councils and making sure that they're up to speed as they're doing that. But I think this is just that minimum one touch, at least one touch a year of the elected bodies to take a look at, okay, here's the budgets that's adopted. Is this tracking with the goals that we had for this program? And maybe Karen can expand on this a little bit for me.
Sure. This actually follows the model of the NORCOM dispatch agency nonprofit, which has been in place for 15, 16 years now, probably more than that. I'm losing a little bit of track here. But the idea is to have that direct engagement by elected officials from each agency periodically, to make sure that we're sort of tracking. It doesn't preclude more frequent briefings directly with all city councils. I will tell you that when we spoke with, there have been 3 city councils that have been briefed earlier this week, and all of them, some members of the city council, each of those agencies said, we love this idea, but we would like to meet more frequently. So my guess is that when this ILA, there's a draft ILA in front of you now. I think the group is going to go back and talk about responding to that request from several council members to think about ways that this group, particularly in the startup period, because it's a new agency, it's a new area of municipal work. Things will probably change. There will probably be some really interesting issues that will come up as the group starts this agency up. So the idea of trying to get this assembly together more frequently as an advisory board of elected leadership.
But in this model, the executive board has essentially all the power and they're non-elected officials.
That is correct, which is again also in keeping with how most of these joint city efforts have, not all of them, but most of them, especially when you're talking about smaller programs, which this is a relatively small program, have been managed. I think the exception here would be like the Cascade Water Alliance, and forgive me, I'm not sure whether Lake Forest Park is a member of that, but that is the one nonprofit agency I can think of that is starting up a whole new water utility to support all of the East Side cities. And they have an executive board with elected officials, but all the other nonprofits that have been and multi-agency multiple cities coming together, creating a joint operation to save costs and create efficiencies, all of those are being led by city administrators and city managers, with occasionally a strong mayor participation on some of the boards instead of the city administrator. And that seems to have worked pretty well for the cities here for the last 15, 20 years. But if this is a big concern for you, we can certainly take that back to the group. The cities, I'll add just that the city manager group looked at about 7 different possible structures for the executive board, and the group considered very seriously a bunch of different approaches, and this is where they landed, trying to ensure there was elected input, but in terms of just trying to manage the day-to-day operations of a relatively small program, this is where they landed as their recommendation.
And one point I'd like to make quickly, to the elected official point, this budget has to be approved in your biennial budget. And so there's a commitment that, we get our budget, we being the executive board, here's the proposed budget for the agency, here's what it means to Lake Forest Park. That then has to be transmitted to the city council as part of your budget process. So you will be looking at that budget and what the request is and how many dollars that means to the city of Lake Forest Park in any biennium as part of this process that we're going through right now for our biennial budget. So that's part of the oversight of, the true budget to the agency. You just wouldn't be involved in the day-to-day operations of how that budget is spent beyond that. Do you have a follow-up, Mr. Rubin?
Yeah, thank you for the explanation. That's helpful. I'm trying to understand the structure for the governance. But you also, Director Hill, mentioned that there's a 6-year commitment and we have a budget sort of projection for the next 2 biennia. The executive board has the ability to determine the governance system for this nonprofit as well as the budget, because they can vote to change it.
Actually, sir, the governance structure could not be changed without the unanimous support of every city council that is participating in the ILA. There are a handful of issues that cannot be tackled only by the executive board. They have to come back to the councils, and changing the governance structure is one of those, as is changing the financial contribution obligations, how those are calculated on behalf of each of the principals.
Okay, that's very helpful, because that is a concern. For example, if we have a 6-year commitment, how do we understand what we see over that 6-year period?
Right.
Because I'm assuming for Lake Forest Park, this is coming out of our general fund.
It would, for these first 2 biennia, it's proposed that the ARPA funds are how we're paying for this. But yes, this would become a general fund. And so, yeah, 27, 28 is in general fund.
Thank you, Mr. Lebo. Any other questions at this point, colleagues? Okay, let's continue, please.
So budget, fiscal agent, and weighted voting is our next section. So as I mentioned earlier, it's with the staffing that is being proposed in this, it's 13 FTEs. That is an executive director, 2 other support staff, and then 10 navigators in the field. Hours of coverage between day and swing shifts covers from 6 a.m. until midnight, 7 days a week from 2 locations. And then graveyard shifts are handled as an on-call basis, similar to your domestic violence personnel who just get called in the middle of the night and go. Obviously, one of the locations is somewhere in Kirkland. You know, I would see that somewhere around the north end of Kirkland, kind of serve Kirkland, Bothell, and then you would have another one along the north end to serve the other 3 cities. And to say serve the cities really isn't the correct terminology because they can rotate through. It's also been discussion that we make space available in every city hall where they spend, and Brooke, yell at me if I'm wrong, but I think it was a couple days, at least every 2 weeks in every city hall. And so they get to know your police officers, they get to know your administration, they get to know the city. And so they're rotating through all of the cities. So they have that understanding. And then the deployment method, you know, the shifts will overlap. Responders work in pair during the overlap. I included this schedule and I will send you the email. I'll email this presentation to you. This was put together by Brooke and City of Kirkland based on their call volume to just kind of see how this would work and would we truly have the coverage that we're aiming to get. And so I will send you this presentation and you can stare at this a little bit longer, but this shows how you get the overlap. I think if I remember right, the gray, that's kind of an overlap where it looks like you have even another additional person, but this covers when people are sick or on vacation, need some type of leave. So you really don't have that other individual. But this shows you how this would be staffed. And like I said, it's based on Kirkland call volumes, just as they have the largest call volume. And then weighted voting. So to get back to this, and wow, I can almost read that from here. So this has a 2-pronged supermajority. So you need not less than 66%, so 4 out of 5, and then of the members. And then you would also need 60% of the weighted vote. And so I put down below, and this is from the budget sheet, but you can see the pro rata share percentage for each of the cities. Bothell at just over 20%, Kenmore at just over 10, and 39 for Kirkland, us at 5.73, and Shoreline at 24, you know, and change each one of those. So you have that 2-pronged approach. So you can't just get 5 friends together, you know, 4 friends together and go. You also have to have that other prong to that. Questions on that? This was, like I said earlier, put in place to make sure that everybody has a voice and everybody has to work together.
Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, thank you. So a concern I have with the supermajority is that if you look, there's one city that is almost to 40%.
Yep.
And so that city would almost have veto power over anything that requires a supermajority vote. And I don't necessarily have a solution. I'm just bringing it up as a point of concern.
Well, so go ahead, Karen.
I was just gonna say, it's sort of like close enough works in horseshoes and hand grenades. As long as they are under 40%, they do not have veto power. Because Kirkland is carrying 54% of the budget in the first biennium because they are stepping up and paying for 3.5 FTEs totally on their own. And then they're sharing the balance of the costs on a pro rata basis. So in the first biennium, you could never meet the second prong of the supermajority vote test without Kirkland's support. So that means in the first biennium, they do have a veto on supermajority vote items, which are the really big items. Thereafter, They're close, but not close enough. They know a single agency would have a veto authority going forward. Now, it is possible that the population numbers could get all wonky and that they could get to the point of having more than 40%. And I think at that point, they would go back probably to the cities and ask for a revision. But the point is to have the two prongs. So you need to have 4 of 5 in members. That's the protection for smaller agencies such as Lake Forest Park. And then the 60% majority is the protection for the larger agencies who are putting in more of the funding. So it's a balance. It's a balanced approach, attempting to be a balanced approach. But you're right, they're close. They're not there yet, but they're close.
Mr. Bowman. Councilmember Riddle.
In the same thought, did it come up to include kind of a caveat with that weighted vote? Not to, not less than 60% of the weighted vote, or the percentage that would, not give veto power to any single city, so that that is baked into the ILA, that they can adjust that vote to prevent a single veto power.
We didn't talk about that, but I believe that's the intent of the parties, and I'm happy to go back and talk to the group about, do you want to have a tweak on this definition to talk about that?
I think it does get now versus if it comes up and then you're kind of in the middle of something, it might be better to be proactive.
Yeah, and I think that also would also raise a budgetary question, because we have tied it to the pro rata share of the budget. And so how you would separate those two through that type of a process. So all of a sudden population got up, well, your pro rata share over here, but how are you going to negotiate what percentage you get in a vote? And so
Yeah.
I think you gave us some work at our next meeting.
You're welcome.
Colleagues, any other questions? Councilmember Bowman, did you? Mr. Lebo?
Yeah, just maybe I'm going to pile on, but I think it's a terrific observation, because I mean, if you imagine if all the cities are growing at the same rate, the city with the largest will outproportion all the others. And Lake Forest Park's not going to grow nearly as fast, even as a percentage rate, as some of the other cities. But when you consider the total, I mean, even if we grew at 10%, which is not going to happen, we're not going to add enough to change 5.73% to 5.2%. Because in the relative sense, we will actually be decreasing over time.
We actually have.
Because of the built,
Population as
well, just because of the built area and the size of the population of the adjoining cities. So whether we recognize it today or not, the concept of Kirkland having veto power will soon be upon us.
Good thoughts.
Thank you.
We'll have that discussion.
Please continue.
Okay. And here's your list of, and you've got this in the ILA, but I just wanted to put it up for the public. And when we put this out to the public of items that require supermajority vote, approval or amendment of the agency budget, including other service changes, decision to acquire assets, over 20% of the current budget, admission of a new principal. We'll get into the details of that in the next slide. Appointing or removing the executive director, amending the agreement, except for those amendments requiring unanimous consent of the principals under section 19. Karen alluded to that earlier. Adoption, amendment of agency bylaws, and then other actions, dissolving it, things like that. But we're not going there. So. And to get into adding new principles. So we want this to be successful, and we'd like to see it grow as long as it can grow sustainably. And so to be able to add a new principal would require a supermajority vote. They need to be a city. They need to have a border that is contiguous with an existing principal, except the terms of the ILA and budget shares. That would be a whole nother discussion, because that would change your weighted voting and budget share. And then you haven't been a principal who decided to bail and then wants to come back within 5 years, just to keep everybody committed. And then we've discussed this, just wanted to point out that Kirkland would be serving as fiscal administrative agent and program host, and they'd all be employees of the city of Kirkland.
Just a question about sharing a border, as Bothell is both in King County and Snohomish County. Is this open to Snohomish County cities as well?
I think that discussion was yes.
Okay.
That may open some other cans of worms that we're not aware of now, but we figured that out during that consideration. But yes, it is open to anybody around us.
Would Bothell being partly in Snohomish County change any financial stuff? Has that come up?
No, I haven't heard anything that came up for them on that.
Thank you.
Colleagues, other questions at this point?
And then I just wanted to throw this up for you. So you see in 2023 one-time costs, and you've seen these numbers before, and these are included in the mayor's proposed budget. You have the just under 23,000 in one-time costs. 2023 is just under 74,000. 2024, that's some assumed increases in COLAs and costs of doing business. And so you see the total of 183,804. And then in 2025, 2026, that's where Kirkland no longer pays that extra for those three individuals. That's where we go true pro rata share. So that's where the full 5.73% comes in. And that also assumes some, if I remember right, some pretty generous COLAs just to be safe in that budget number as well. So that gives you an idea of there. And, I think for Councilmember Lebo, if you threw another 8% on top of that, just to think into the next biennium, you'd probably be close.
Councilman Riddle.
Thank you. In this budget, are we proposing cost of living appropriate level of pay for these positions? Like how?
It's been very well vetted. We've worked a lot with Brooke and HR directors to make sure that we're positioning these. So these are living wages. These are positions that are paid such that we aren't just a churn. We don't just have people cycling in, come in, you're low paid, we burn you out and you move on and we start over again. And so that was the goal of that. And then to look at, what are we providing as COLAs? They will get the same amount in those COLAs.
So the intent is they could live in the communities they serve.
Make them live in the communities?
If they could.
That they could, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, that's always the goal, right? Is you want to pay your
We wanna
employees.
make them.
So yeah, I'm just like, well.
No, but is that kind of the level? Like they could live in these communities and that's kind of where
You
you're.
would hope so, yes. And then the other things I wanted to point out, the bullets at the bottom, the budget assumes that the mid-funding that we already received from the county continues. I think as a whole, we've noted that, there's got to be other sources of funding, county, state, there's a lot of money in the governor's budget for these types of programs. And so we are going to chase not only the the grant revenue that we have today, but other sources of revenue. Take a look at that. And then, the last bullet item just recognizes that Kirkland's 54% this year, and then we go pro rata in 25, 26. Next slide. Okay. Oh, go back. I'll go back one.
Yes, sir. I just saw something. So for the first, sorry,
Please go right ahead.
Thank you.
I was looking at
So
numbers.
for the first biennium, if Kirkland is contributing 54%, would that mean they get 54% weighting for every single vote, whether it's a simple or a supermajority? And does that mean they effectively have veto power over every single decision for the first 2 years?
Karen's shaking her head, so I'm gonna let her answer the question.
They do have veto over they do have a veto over supermajority items, but remember that's assuming that they that you still need to find multiple agencies to put something forward. They are one, you can't meet the second prong of the vote in the first biennium without Kirkland's support because they are weighing more than half the budget. But regular, routine items that aren't on that supermajority list, that's just think that's also 4 of 5. So no one has veto on routine items.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if we need this slide now, because we kind of did it as we went along, but any other comments, concerns, questions, program, staffing, funding, membership provisions? I think we've covered that all.
Alex? I did want to note the provision, the other conditions for additional principals, which I think is really important, that if people choose to, as a condition of membership, that they need to, the executive board can choose to have them compensate for joining the mix, because there's going to be significant upfront investments going here along the line. And I think that that's absolutely appropriate, because Kirkland is carrying a lot of the water here at the beginning and helping out in an enormous way, as well as other cities. And if additional cities join the mix, then it's essential that they contribute and recognize those efforts at that time as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fully loaded budget. It's got, computer equipment, it's got vehicles, it's got uniforms. I mean, it's all in there. And so if you were to add a significant population to that, yeah, you're going to need some upfront investment to get that off the ground.
Thank you.
Okay, we're almost to the end. And this last one should be pretty easy. Administrative provisions just relate to termination amendments, dispute resolution. You can read that. That's not the fun and exciting stuff. The effective date of this, so we're proposing to bring this back to all the councils in October for approval. I think for us, that would mean your last meeting in October, assuming we can get there and, after we've heard from all the councils. But the ultimate goal is by the end of the year. We just don't want to have to try and make you do this through Thanksgiving and Christmas. And then have an effective date of January 1st. While the agency would be created on January 1st, it's not going to be functional on January 1st. Radar, we still have employees over in Bothell. That transition is going to need to take place. But the goal is to be operational with the existing staff and anybody that we hire in between now and then. We just hired another navigator within the last week or two. But by Q1 of 2023, so by the end of March of 2023 would be the goal, to have this up and operational. This is where I get to ask you other general ILA questions
No,
or concerns.
I'm still trying to understand the role of the principals assembly in relationship to supermajorities, because in section 19, it talks about there are elements that require supermajority vote and consent of the legislative authorities of the principals, but I don't see where consent is defined, because one of the provisions that requires the principal consent is principal contribution responsibilities consistent with section 12D. But then when you go back to the principals assembly in section 9, it says the actions and recommendations of the principals assembly shall be advisory to the executive board. So how do you separate? Well, you have an undefined consent in order to change the financial contributions of the principals. But then when you go back to the principals assemblies, it says that they merely recommend and advise.
I think that the principles in the sense in section 19, that legislative bodies, the reference to the principles legislative bodies means each and every city council. Each and every city council would have to approve changes to the interlocal agreement that covered any of the items in section 19. That's a very different from the principals assembly, which is simply one council member from each city council coming together periodically to hear how things are going and provide advice to the executive board for them to take under consideration. So it's a really different function in each case. The assembly is advisory with one council member from each council. Section 19 speaks to situations where we're doing something pretty fundamental to the deal. And in those cases, each and every city council would have to agree to that change.
Thank you. That's a very clear explanation for me. Thank you.
Councilmember, colleagues, other questions? Councilmember Riddle.
Just thinking a bit about the ownership of property. Great, I'm almost forgetting what I was gonna say. For large purchases, and I think this came up with the police vehicle, that we were, we needed to put in some money for the, after the purchase of this vehicle. There wasn't quite the same voting and approval process. So is there any requirement for authorization for over like a certain dollar amount to be spent?
Yeah, so that was earlier. Anything that's over 20% of the budget. And I'd have to go back to it. Karen, can you help me here?
That's right. There's nothing in this ILA that authorizes the executive board to demand a capital contribution from any principal. Your decision every biennium is whether to participate in the recommended operating budget. And that's the recommended operating budget. That's as high as it's going to go for the next biennium, unless they come back to you and ask you to do more, but they can't make you do more than you agree to upfront every biennium for the operating budget. In terms of if the agency has a major purchase that it needs to make, it will need to make those from within their approved operating budget. And that if it's an item, I mean, the budget requires a supermajority vote in order to get that to you to approve. And if they're going to buy something very large within a biennium that is within that budget, that particular item also needs a supermajority vote.
And the current threshold's about the 20%.
The 20%.
The
20% requires that supermajority vote.
Requires the supermajority.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We toyed with that as a dollar amount and we finally landed on, 20% because budgets will change over time.
Of course.
Okay.
Colleagues, any other questions? Last thoughts, Mr. Hill?
Next steps, we will reconvene after all the city staffs have met with their councils, gotten the feedback and incorporate the feedback and then get you the next draft, obviously, and track changes so you can see where those changes were made and what they were. And the goal is October and we'll see if we can stick to that goal. That's it.
Great. Thank you, both Karen and Brooke, for your assistance. And thank you very much, Mr. Hill. This is very informative and we'll look forward to seeing it probably the second meeting in October.
Well, maybe the first meeting in October as another draft.
Even better. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care, guys. Okay, with that, we have another presentation coming up here. We have the update from Sound Transit. I know there's people waiting in the wings to see this. This is, well, we're actually at prime time here. This is great. So I understand we have, I can read these names. Faith, Rick, and Ariel. Is that correct? Hey, welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. And while the presentation is being pulled up, I'll do a quick, well, thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening to speak to you all and give you an update on the Sound Transit Bus Rapid Transit project. Introductions, my name is Rick Kapka. I work for Sound Transit. I'm the Deputy Program Executive for this project. And with me this evening is Faith Rowland. Faith is Sound Transit's Director of Real Property. And yeah, we're glad to be here this evening and we'll take you through hopefully a fairly succinct presentation. So let me see if this works. All right. Yeah, so why are we here this evening? Well, we're going to give you two portions of the presentation. First, I'm just going to give you a general overview of the project, just to get the council up to date on things. And then Faith is going to come up and provide an overview of the Sound Transit property acquisition and relocation process. which we are starting to get into as part of our project. So a brief overview of the project. So STRIDE will be the name of the bus rapid transit program that Sound Transit implements. And STRIDE was brought on board back in 2016 as part of the ST3 Transit Expansion Program that was voted on by the voters. This project includes 3 separate service lines, and I'm going to describe those to you with that graphic on the left side. So S1 is a rapid transit line that runs from Burien all the way up to Bellevue on the 405 corridor. S2 is a service line that will run from Bellevue all the way up to Linwood on the 405 corridor. And S3 will run from Shoreline over to Bothell through Lake Forest Park on the Northeast 145th and SR 522 corridor. A few other things to mention. One other big part of our project is, and you can see it on the map in the upper right-hand corner, is we are building a bus operations and maintenance facility as part of this program. This is the first time Sound Transit will have that type of facility. You can see it up there off 405 in Canyon Park. So that's another big part of our program. And then I want to mention, once this service is up and running, we will be connecting to several of the light rail stations that are to be online shortly or already online. We've got Linwood, Shoreline, Bellevue, and Tequila as connection points for our riders on the STRIDE service. A little bit more about BRT. So what is BRT? Well, it means fast, frequent, reliable service. And so on the S3 corridor, what we're talking about is buses traveling, one service is running every 10 minutes along the corridor. And right now we're planning to run service up to 19 hours Monday through Saturday and up to 17 hours on Sunday. So a little bit more about what our stations are going to look like across the corridor, as well as what our buses are going to be. So first, the stations, the BRT stations, will have longer platforms than what you might be used to seeing with a typical bus stop or shelter. They're going to be long enough to have 2 buses service riders at the same time. So for example, we may have a STRIDE bus and a King County Metro bus back-to-back servicing riders at the same time. Additionally, similar to our light rail stations, our BRT stations will have an off-board fare collection system, the Orca card reader system that folks may be familiar with, as well as a dynamic messaging system that will keep riders informed in real time of buses coming and going. For the buses, you can see in this graphic on the bottom, it's pretty exciting to see the branding that we're bringing forward with these new buses. On the bottom left-hand side, you can see we're going to be bringing double-deck coaches as part of the 405 corridor. So the S1 and the S2 service lines will be running double deckers. And on S3, and I'm really excited about this, we are bringing fully electric articulated buses across the corridor. So that 9-mile corridor will run electric buses. We'll have charging infrastructure at both ends of the corridor to charge those batteries. And a little bit more about S3 and Lake Forest Park. Just want to give you some context about the background of the S3 line. When Sound Transit was putting together plans for ST3 back in 2016, the 522 segment of BRT was not originally included in the draft plan. So fortunately, the cities of Lake Forest Park, Shoreline, Kenmore, Bothell came together to advocate for the inclusion of bus rapid transit along this corridor. Fortunately, it got included in that plan when it was finalized, and that's what we're bringing forward to you all now. We have 3 station pairs that will be constructed within Lake Forest Park. We'll have 1 station at Northeast 153rd Street, 1 station at Northeast 165th, and then 1 here at the town center at Ballinger Way Northeast. There will be road widening as part of our project along this corridor. We're adding road width to allow for additional bus-only lanes in the portions of the corridor that don't currently have them. In addition, we will be installing what's called transit signal priority at the intersections throughout the corridor, and that's going to help buses move more efficiently through the intersections. And then lastly, mentioning pedestrian improvements, where we are adding bus-only lanes, we will also be adding sidewalks to improve pedestrian movement throughout the corridor, as well as at our station locations, we'll be improving pedestrian access to those stations. Okay, a little bit about schedule. I want to give you an explanation about this table at the top. So you can see our 4 different portions of the project, the bus base, and then the 3 service lines. On the far right, so those are the dates or the years that we're currently projecting to be coming online and coming into service. There is a column that says realignment, and I want to take a moment to explain that to you all. So given changes to the economy, including the global pandemic and resource challenges, last year, the Sound Transit Board undertook a process that's called realignment. Realignment was the agency's way of addressing the revenue and supply challenges that we were facing. It was really a way to prioritize our projects to make sure we could still deliver everything that was promised in ST3. It just might not happen at the same time. So for STRIDE, the outcome of the realignment process was the dates you see there. You can see that our dates right now in current time in 2022 are trending a little bit later. So our project is doing what we can to pick that time up. There's a few examples of what we're working on to see how we can bring our project back in line with the realignment dates. We're looking for strategies to accelerate our schedule, looking for different construction methods that will make things happen more efficiently when we get into construction. We're looking for ways to improve our own internal policies and procedures to speed up the work. And then our agency partners, our third-party partners, we're looking for ways to make our review and permitting more efficient. And my last slide before I hand it off to Faith, we are at 60% design right now for this portion of the project. This is the point in time in which property acquisition is front and center. So we are starting to get into that, and Faith is going to talk to you about that. And then early next year, we're going to be looking for opportunities to come to the community and share with them the 60% design, give them a chance to provide some feedback. So you'll be hearing more from us about that in the near future. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Faith.
Forward.
Down.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I would be remiss if I didn't share a little fact that you don't know about me. 28 years ago, I started my public land acquisition career working for King County. And I was assigned a project to help a small suburban city within King County to buy a park. And that park you'll probably recognize is Finks Animal Acres. So it's been a while, but it's still there, and it's a great gem and a great resource for Lake Forest Park. And so we have that connection, and I thought I should share because you probably didn't know that. So let me talk about the role of the Real Property Group with Sound Transit. And I take this very seriously. My job is to treat everyone fairly and with respect and consistently throughout our project and across all of our projects. We spend tax dollars and grant dollars wisely. We count for those. And we acquire sufficient property rights needed to build, operate, and maintain our transit system. That's really my role. I have a lot of rules that go with how we do our work. We're really guided by the Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Policy Act of 1970 as amended. That's the title. We call it the Uniform Act. And it really guides when we have federal funding on a project. We have a lot of FTA funding and nexus to FTA. But even without federal funding, that's our guiding principle. We have board policy. We have Sound Transit's own real property acquisition, relocation policies, procedures, and guidelines. FTA's Circular 5010 and the RCW's Revised Code of Washington. So all of that combined to the rules that we follow when we buy land for public infrastructure projects. I want to share with you before I talk about the types of acquisitions, because our board authorized an acquisition package today to acquire 43 additional properties for the STRIDE program. There are about 220 properties throughout the STRIDE program. And so we forwarded an additional package. We take them to the board, and as the designs are more fully vetted and just as we have enough information, we take them to packages of 40, 50, 60 at a time to our board. And so today the board did authorize us to move forward on 43 properties. 41 of those are within the city of Lake Forest Park. And when they authorize us to move forward, they authorize the use of eminent domain. And I want to point this out because most people are fearful of that term. And what I like to share with you is that it's really about providing due process and equal benefits to everybody, which is why we authorize it all together. There are a couple of benefits to eminent domain for a property owner. They have a longer time to reinvest under capital gains, and the real estate excise tax is waived. Those are two things that folks don't know about eminent domain. But in addition to that, there really is a lot of due process that goes along with it, and everybody receives that same benefit, whether we work with you at the front end or the back end of the project. Let me go back, sorry. So what do we buy when we're buying bus stations and road improvements? We really occasionally need to buy a full property acquisition, so the whole thing. Most of the time, we're buying a part of a property, either a strip along a frontage or an easement. And then occasionally there are also just temporary rights that we need to come in and construct, but we don't need to buy additional property for the end product or the end project. Where possible, we acquire easements rather than fee simple. It's a lot less burden to a property owner, and it doesn't impact their setbacks or their density in a lot of cases. So we really do try to buy only what we need for the project. It also helps limit that impact if we buy an easement or a temporary right. And in most cases, we are also acquiring property that's not on market. So how do I get you from pencil lines on the left to building a station? We're sort of at the spot on the left right now, and I have to get to the one on the right. Once the record of decision, when the board accepts and determines our final alignment, which they did last fall, the design process really kicks into high gear. And at that point, we start working closely. We start re-engaging with property owners. And we also start looking at the impacts that are more parcel specific. We really can't do that until we get more granular with each property. And if it's a temporary impact or a permanent, this is when we really start finding that out. So after the board authorization today, I'll start with today since it's fresh on everybody's mind. We appraise each property interest that we need to acquire, whether it's temporary or permanent. We encourage and strongly encourage the landowner's participation. Landowners know their property better than we do, and they are invited as a part of the federal guidelines. They shall be given the opportunity to participate. Oh, I forgot to point out a little fact. There are 243 shalls in the Uniform Act. In other words, we shall do. And there's 244 mays. So we have a lot of flexibility, but we also have a lot of rules that go with what we do. I often get a question at this point, should there be somebody that is a tenant rather than a property owner? And when do we notify tenants? Because right now we've been talking about properties and property owners. We really don't know who is an occupant at this stage in our projects. And if a property owner does share, hey, I own this property, but somebody else lives there, that's when we really get that information. we want to make sure that if somebody is being displaced, that we know who they are and that they're provided all of the benefits that go along with it. We do provide, should we need to acquire a property fully, we provide relocation benefits for anybody who is displaced. And I'll go into some details about those in a moment.
Faith, could I interrupt you for
You
just a
absolutely
moment?
can,
Just,
sir.
could you make sure that you speak to the microphone? Sometimes the people in,
I apologize.
no, it's no problem.
I
It's
talk
just-
with my hands and I move,
Well, and I think
and-
your
and I-
presence in the room and addressing the
I
audience is
am also
admirable.
being
But we want to
mindful
make
of.
sure that everybody
my
can hear
back.
us and the recording is established as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair
Apologize for the
French.
interruption.
No, you're fine. So at the point that we know that we're moving forward, we've started the appraisal process. We find out if folks are in tenancy that don't own a property. We also then, the next step is something called establishing just compensation. That is, once an appraisal is completed, that appraisal is reviewed by an independent party, and then the agency bases the offer on the appraisal. It's the amount of the appraisal, not less than the appraisal. So that's an important piece that I think folks think we're going to offer less. When an appraisal is completed, that's the amount of the offer. We also provide, well, let me throw out this point for a second. This is a directive that we have, but it's also what we live by. We negotiate in good faith and avoid litigation. That's actually something that not only are we supposed to do because it's a shall, but it's because it's how we work. We sit down with each property owner individually and we determine what their questions are, what their concerns are. If they think that the value we've come up with as part of the appraisal process is acceptable. If they don't like it, tell us why you don't like it. What do we miss? I mean, that's part of our negotiation process. If there is somebody that's a tenant and that it appears that they might be displaced, we provide advisory services to that person and provide them with relocation services. I always like to point out that we buy real property and we move personal property. And so to the extent that somebody is displaced, if they're a tenant, we're moving their personal property and paying for that benefit. Relocation benefits, by the way, are robust. They're unique to an individual or business. And they're also relocation tools that we provide. They are also not taxable. So that's an important piece, that if somebody is getting the benefit, they're not taxed on that benefit. Some resources that we give each landowner, besides having an agent assigned to them directly, we will provide translation services. We want to make sure that every person that we work with understands the process, what information we're sharing with them in a language they can understand. We provide reimbursement for professional services. So up to $7,500 is reimbursed for attorney's fees to review our offer. We reimburse up to $5,000 for an appraisal. So if the landowner doesn't like our appraisal or wants to get their own, we'll reimburse for up to $5,000 for their own appraisal. And then accounting fees. Should somebody need to determine the impacts of this from an accounting perspective, we'll reimburse up to $2,500 for accounting fees. And these are much more robust than most other public agencies. And so I do like to share that with folks because it's an important thing that we try to not have this cost you to look at our offer. We can do advance payments for relocation should there be a hardship situation, as well as move benefits. I'd like to talk about the timeline for a little bit because we are unfortunately a little slower than the market. You know, houses weren't staying on the market very long, not too long ago, although I believe that is changing. But we do take every single property to the board for authorization. So I don't move forward to acquire a property until the board has authorized us, as they did today. There are a few exceptions. Occasionally there's an early acquisition, but even those do go to the board. Most of our acquisitions start after the environmental process and a record of decision. It takes a lot of time to meet all the requirements. It's about 18 to 24 months. So we're thorough, but we're not very fast. Just share that with you. I can't certify a property is available for construction until we have possession of the property rights. I can't take possession of a property until we've paid for those rights. So those are shalls within what we do. And from inception to the closeout of the project, we really are working directly with the property owners. We also, Sound Transit, have community outreach folks that are working during the construction phase of a project. So long after we've acquired the property and construction's begun, there's going to be a person that you can call, that property owner, that your resident can call if they have an issue during the construction phase as well. So we really do try to have touches and folks available. I shared my business card with 5 people today that spoke at the board meeting, and I have a pocket full tonight. And so anybody that wishes to talk with me directly, please see me afterwards, and I'll make sure that you have a person to talk to. That's really important. We do work with local jurisdictions, as we're doing with you, when we close out our project. And I say that because once we move a utility, put in a new sidewalk, widen a roadway, some of those improvements are conveyed to the cities, to the jurisdictions that we're in. Others are retained by Sound Transit. So it really depends on each jurisdiction. And we'll be working with you along some of the improvements along 522, for example. And those are typically done after the construction's completed. So I always like to stop here and talk about something that was an aha for me today. And I appreciate you sharing something with me and our board shared. You know, the last couple of years, we haven't been able to touch people or see people or talk to them in person. And, you know, we're the right-of-way folks, the folks that go out and buy property, you know, we're used to knocking on doors. We're used to sitting at dining room tables and drinking coffee with folks and explaining what we're doing. And this last couple of years have been tough, and we've lost a little bit of that. And so I always like to point that out, but I think we're getting back to old school, knocking on doors and sitting at dining room tables and drinking coffee and helping explain our project in a way that we're used to doing. And we've lost that for the last couple of years. So I'm hoping to get back to knocking on doors and drinking lots of coffee again. You know, we have pivoted though. The right-of-way process at Sound Transit did not slow down during the pandemic. We just pivoted to a new process. We learned how to do e-signing, e-notaries, and e-recordings. All of those things didn't exist 2 years ago. And virtual public meetings, virtual hearings, virtual mediations, all of that is now a new tool that we have. And I think it's here to stay, but we are going to still get back to that sitting at the dining room table again. And so with that, I want to end where I started, and that is that we treat everyone fairly, consistently, and with respect. I'm here to commit that to you, to your citizens, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Colleagues, questions? Councilmember Riddle.
I kind of have several, and I think it's for possibly both of you, if you wouldn't mind. Thinking about the 60% kind of design as it's been presented, one of the pieces that I see is that we're losing a lot of our green experience as moving through the city. It converts a lot to concrete. And I know that I'm not the only one in our community that's concerned about this. Do you have any comments on that and returning our community back to a green experience along Buffalo Way?
Well, I can say as we're advancing our design, we're working closely with Lake Forest Park city partners, Administrator Hill and some of the other team members with Lake Forest Park are engaging with us on a frequent basis to review at how we're advancing our design, and we're looking to meet the city's requirements in terms of future landscaping across the corridor. So I think I can say we're going to be working closely with the city to make sure that the finished product meets the desires that you have in terms of green.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then the parking garage in Lake Forest Park isn't on the map. At one point during the realignment, it moved out to the 2040s.
Yes.
Can you give an update on the parking garage?
Yeah, I can speak to that, and I did mean to mention that during the presentation. Thank you for asking. So in terms of that realignment process I was describing, the big change that occurred with the Sound Transit BRT program is that any of the parking facilities that were intended to be constructed as part of the program were deferred. So within Lake Forest Park, I can say, I think the status is still the same. And that is right now, I think 2044 is when we are by board direction planning to bring a parking structure to Lake Forest Park. And we have other parking facilities across the corridor as well that are also delayed. So.
Thank you for that. And then I think the last comment I think it would be for you is there a policy of undergrounding utilities on stretches where you're impacting utilities?
Absolutely. Part of our widening of the roadway and constructing the station platforms, we're going to be encountering utilities. That's part of the design process right now. We have engineers that are working to investigate what utilities currently exist, if those need to be relocated, engaging with those utility owners to make sure that they understand our work and what we need to do. So yeah, that's absolutely a big part of our project. And we will be, in some cases, relocating utilities across the corridor, and in others, adding utilities to take care of the added infrastructure we're building.
Thank you.
Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, thanks for your presentation. I think at this point, Councilmember Riddle has asked my question 3 times tonight, but I did want to expand on the parking garage. My understanding is that for all parking facilities that have been deferred, in exchange, Sound Transit would work on microtransit solutions to solve the first mile, last mile problem of getting people to the BRT stations. And so I was hoping you could comment on how that is progressing.
So we have a station access allowance program that I think gets to maybe what you're referring to. And that is an opportunity for Sound Transit to work with the cities and the local jurisdictions to come up with ways to improve access to our stations. So that program is moving forward. I think by somewhere around the first quarter of next year, I expect that we would have a kind of a pretty well-defined plan for what we will do within each of the cities in terms of improving access to the stations. So it is a program, it's moving forward. Yeah, that's what I can speak to right now. In terms of.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Councilmember Furtoni. Excuse me.
Thank you both for your wonderful presentation. Drilling down a little bit deeper on the whole green question that Councilmember Riddle asked you already. I've heard that 500 trees are going to be cut down as a result of this project, and that the replacements are based off of the canopy cover that we'll have in 30 years, which means that for 30 years, we won't have the benefit of these trees. I'm wondering if you could address that point.
I can say that, yes, there will be some trees that need to be removed in order to create the new infrastructure that we're building. I can't off the top of my head validate that quantity, but we are looking to preserve the trees that we can. If we are removing trees, we are looking to replace where we can as well with new landscaping as part of our design. But I know as we move forward past the 60% design phase, I know the design team will really be getting into defining exactly how many trees need to be relocated and what the replacement is going to be.
Can I comment on,
Please.
All right, so in terms of the number, I believe it's coming from the March 2021 SEPA. And I think the exact language is something like around 450 trees will be removed or altered. And so I don't know what the breakdown is between how many would be removed versus just pruned in some way. But to help to reassure the community where those numbers are coming from, are there more up-to-date numbers than that SEPA?
Off the top of my head, I don't have those. I will tell you here, though, we'd be happy to come back and give you an update, or I can pass that through Administrator Hill at some point as I get more information. I'd be happy to take an action item away and be prepared to talk more about that in the future.
Thank you.
Councilmember, colleagues, other questions? I just, a couple of questions myself, just my colleagues have asked most of the questions, and piggybacking on the question of the green, the removal of these trees, many of them go back to the 1920s. So we're talking about 100 years of growth on some pretty steep slopes, particularly near 155th and 153rd throughout that area. And I understand as part of the SEPA process and part of your design, you're going to have to be coming up with solutions for making sure there's mitigation relative to the steep slopes. But we've been hearing an enormous amount of concern out in the community about the loss of the canopy coverage, as well as the replacement sort of schedule. And I, for one, am really hopeful that Sound Transit is going to find a way to go above and beyond what the minimum requirements are, because this is going to mean a radical alteration of this community and impacts that are really unforeseen and may not be foreseen for a number of decades. We every year have slides. We do our best to keep our tree canopy growing everywhere. And so while I recognize things need to move forward, I think you will hear tonight from public comment that there's real serious concern here. The other thing I wanted to mention is here we are, 2022 schedule has been changed. Now we're seeing additional delays going down. And how do we know we're not going to be here 2 years from now and we're going to be hearing 2031? Because from my standpoint, there's a lot of investment that's been made by this community in terms of emotions and tensions, and I think I recognize that the vagaries of a large agency and being beholden to a board. At the same time, I'm feeling as though this particular project seems to be third tier in many regards, and I won't debate the merits of it right now, but the impression that it gives this community is that if it's going to happen, it better happen, and not with delays or with, and I'm truly concerned about the comments that were made today in the board meeting relative to public outreach. I think this community has a long history of trying to have robust public outreach. So to your question about coming back again and providing that content, I would say unequivocally, yes, please. We need that information. The community needs it. And I'll leave it there. Yes, follow-up question.
I do not want to steal your thunder, but I have been thinking about the acquisition side, and there's one item that I want to bring to light, and that is we're considering petitioning for lower speed limits on Bothell Way. And I know that may not affect the bus lanes per se, but I believe given the delay that we will work through that process with WashDOT and the other jurisdictions before we're built. So if that has any positive impact on lane sizes that could have positive impact on the property owners, I would appreciate that consideration, because I think you're gonna be a lot happier if you have to acquire less, and we're gonna be a lot happier if you have to acquire less.
Indeed.
Absolutely. So, and that could save more trees. And you see where I'm going with this. I think it could be a real benefit for our community. It could be a benefit for your project as well. So I would really appreciate continuing that discussion as we move through our process. If it's obviously we haven't voted on it yet, but we will be doing that soon-ish. So please consider, even though you're at 60%, what that could do and any positive impacts that will have. Community would demand it, I think.
Yeah, thank you for the comment. Colleagues, other questions, comments? Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. I would invite you to stay to listen to some of the public comment. I know we have a lot of people in the out there as well in the audience that want to make public comment too. So thank you for coming. Okay, with that, we are going to move on to citizen comments, and I think we will start with people in-house and go from there. Thank you, Chief. Let's see. And so first, we have Liz Krasminski, excuse me. Hi, Liz.
Hi, how you doing?
Doing well, thank you.
You've been to my house.
I have. Yes, yes.
So that sets the stage. I'm Liz Krasminski. I live at 162 34 39th Avenue Northeast. And I have been working from my home for the last 2 years. I have suffered hearing loss from some of the loud trucks that are on State Route 522. And I would maintain that we are not being treated equitably by Sound Transit. We are going to lose, they're going to purchase 5 feet of our properties. They're going to lease, I believe, 6 feet of our properties. And then you're also going to have an easement. So I'm going to lose 16 feet of my backyard. It's already noisy. I already have buses coming through my bedroom door at 4 a.m. and the whole house shakes. And I understand that Sound Transit has absolutely no interest in building a sound wall along State Route 522. I don't think that's equitable. I don't think that's equitable for me. I'm going to lose all my trees, but the trees are of concern. But I think the damage to my property, the damage to my quiet enjoyment of my property is a bigger concern. And I really don't understand why I wrote a letter on August 14th and I never got a response. I sent an email to Yvonne on August 14th. I've gotten no response. I've had lots of conversations with her. I promise not to be an obstructionist, but you're not coming on my property until I understand why you have no interest in providing for quiet enjoyment in my home, in my backyard. Are there any plans for any sound mitigation? Any? I haven't heard of any. Is the city council considering how they're going to spend the mitigation funds that I believe the city's going to be afforded by Sound Transit? Does anybody have any answers? You want to buy my property, but you don't want to talk to me about it. You don't want to tell me what you're going to do for me. You know, when you realigned 522 and you took the 522 bus that goes straight downtown on 522, providing redundancy for the train, there was no conversation about that. It just poof, it just disappeared one day. So now I get to go 522 to 145th, 145th to a train. That's 2 buses. How does that add to my quality of life? You say equity. I just don't see how that's been equitable for the people along 522. I recognize some of my neighbors here. I don't know if anybody else has similar feelings. I have a whole list here. I'm not going to yield my 3 minutes, but I do feel like Sound Transit has me and my neighbors over a barrel. You're just going to take our property and you're going to give us a chain link fence, and that's not acceptable. You're taking the trees. You're all upset about the trees, but I'm upset about my hearing loss from the trucks. What's the proposal here? Where's the value that you're going to add to me as a property owner here? You shut the door on the sound wall. You given me a chain link fence. Where's the value to me? Where's the equity? Does anybody want whatever remaining time of mine?
Actually, you're a little bit over. I want to be
Okay.
sensitive to our other guests. But thank you very much, Liz, for your comments. And hopefully we can get some additional answers for you.
There's no money in it, but.
Let's see. And next we have Dale Troy. Welcome, Dale. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, I've got some prepared comments, but I also live on 39th Avenue Northeast. Our property backs up to 522. And I've got tinnitus too. So I've got starting hearing loss since I moved here in 2018. Anyway, so just as a reminder to the mayor and the council, the LFP is Tree City USA. And from our website, and I quote from the LFP website, the city of LFP is committed to retaining the forested look of the city and the associated environmental benefits provided by our urban forest. End quote. Tree removal without subsequent tree replacement is not allowed. It's been estimated by others that over 500 trees might be lost as a result of this proposed highway widening. I believe that this is underestimate. On my property alone, just by how it looks on the design, I'm going to lose about 57 trees many of which are about 8 to 12 trunks coming from the base. It's a full mature, basically hedge that doesn't allow me to see any of the traffic. When that's gone, what's going to happen to my property value when instead of seeing no traffic, I got 6 lanes of traffic? And moving the highway closer, my decibel levels on my deck are probably 75 to 80 decibels during like 5 o'clock. It's going to be worse. Anything over 70 gives you permanent damage to hearing. But also please consider the habitat to birds, squirrels, raccoons. I've got mountain beavers on our property, and then the occasional deer that all kind of use that cover. Also, you know, the 522 project, when it goes south on Botha Way, when it gets to 145th or even before that, there's no transit lanes dedicated to the south of 145th Lake City Way, also west going to on 522 going to the light rail station. There's not going to be dedicated transit lanes there. And if that's the case, why do we need a dedicated transit lane like from 153rd to 168th? It's going to be like 15 blocks and 500 trees. So, and basically through LFP, there's a through the length of our property or our city, there's a wide 2-way left turn lane. There's already 6 lanes for traffic there. We need 4 lanes of traffic, 2 lanes of transit. Most of that is already there. All we need to do is maybe we have to widen some where the traffic lights are to give left turn lanes, but you've already got 6 lanes already made. Anyway, so I've got, okay, is that?
I guess that's a new
I'm
tone.
not sure.
for-
But anyway, if you go, belabor the point, but if you go north a little ways, like at the Up Lake Professional Center, they've got a 5-foot sidewalk, a curb, 6 lanes of traffic with a yellow line. That's all we need. And that we have that already. There's room for all that right now. So I would please ask that for us, our LFP, we're a tree city. It's a no-brainer. The city has to stand up for what's been our credo for some time now. The needless cutting of our trees really can't be allowed. We have to stand up and tell Sound Transit, no, this plan doesn't work. Let's change that up a little bit to take all those into account, the trees and the loss of the trees that we're not going to get back. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you for your time. Let's see, that's all we have. Is there anyone else in the audience, please? Would you state your name for the record, please?
My name is Carrie Holgrimson. I wasn't going to speak because I was at the Sound Transit Board today and made quite a few comments there that I would encourage you to listen to. I think I am one of the property owners that are impacted by this. Sound Transit's lack of communication to those property owners has caused a lot of problems that you're seeing here. They have spoken to me as a property owner one time 2 years ago, and then we heard absolutely nothing until we got notification today that they were going to try to get approval from Sound Transit Board to acquire properties. We were made aware that that vote was occurring. However, we've had no information about what this from 10% now to 60% design was going to look like and how it was going to impact our properties. So now they've gotten approval to just go ahead and take our properties without communicating what that looks like. In other words, are you taking it temporarily? Are you taking it permanently? How much are you taking? At one point, we were told it was only temporary. Then we had surveyors come out to come in an additional 20 feet into our property, which takes down 2 structures. They don't even know anything about that. So I am frustrated with the lack of communication Sound Transit has had to the property owners that are directly impacted. 43 property owners are impacted through this corridor in your city. This is one of the largest groups of properties they admitted today, 43, that they have had to deal with quite some time. Direct property owners that they are acquiring property from. So they're just not, they're not communicating to us. Today, I've gotten business cards after they've already said they can acquire our property. You know, that's a little bit late. So I just want to make you aware of how Sound Transit is treating your citizens, and make sure that you know that they are not being fair and how they are dealing with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, is there anyone else here in person? Please, and then we'll move to the members that are online. And just for the record, for those of you that are online, if you need to have your actual name listed, please. I see a couple of people with initials. Sometimes it's a little challenging for us to call on you in that regard. So please make sure you're renamed to your full name or correct name. Please, my apologies.
No problem. Thank you. My name is Christina Maldonado, and I am a resident here at Lake Forest Park. I live right on 522. My home is already just feet from what already exists. So this is something that's going to impact us greatly. And I know it's been said here today at the meeting earlier downtown, and about Sound Transit not communicating with property owners. And again, 100% true. Same position. I've only been contacted once directly in 2 years. And despite calling or responding to emails, still, and questions that property owners have, that I have, that my neighbors have, never answered. They're never answered. Only recently I received a letter saying the board meeting was going to happen. You're free to make comments, yet we have no information to accurately formulate our concerns and comments to a board that was considering approving acquisition. So it's quite offensive to hear from Sound Transit staff that they're very experienced. They've treat people fairly. They take this seriously, and that is not what has happened at all. And I really want this council here to truly understand that what they have said here today is not the experience of property owners. Form letters, form emails, things on websites is not communication directly, informative communication with property owners. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Anyone else here in council chambers that'd like to make a public comment? Okay, Matt, we'll move on here. I'm going to start with Alexia Bailey, please. Please unmute yourself. Can you hear us okay, Alexia?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you. Please go ahead.
Perfect. I was in the Sound Transit meeting earlier today, and I am sitting right now in one of the impacted properties. I live at Shannon Heights, which is at 155th Place. We're in between La Avalon and Sheridan Market, and to the one side, and apartments to the north. As a board member of Shannon Heights, we have had some conversations with Sound Transit, including one that we had last week that I set up after we got that same letter that everyone else got. I'm trying now actually to set up a meeting specifically with the design team, as we're hoping to help them to appreciate the nuances as they relate to our block. We do support public transportation, but we also want our homes to be the places that they were when we bought them, and places that we want to live. For Shannon Heights, our primary interest is in the stand of trees that's directly in front of our building. Speaking for myself, one of the big reasons that I bought in Lake Forest Park is about the aesthetics, and definitely I appreciate the way that Lake Forest Park takes trees seriously. The trees in front of our building make my apartment feel like a tree house. That's why I bought it. That's why I love it. If we lose those trees, we have zero privacy and no protection from all the kinds of problems that come from being next to 522. The sound, the pollution, the trees give us at least a little bit of protection from the heat, which is only going to get worse. I don't want to live in a heat island. All the other things that everyone else also talked about as well. The maps that we've had so far have all been, even after when they sent that, it's still at 30%. We're told the design is at 60%. We've only seen 30%. We haven't seen any update that would show us what the impact would be to our property. So I agree that the communication has not been great. What we're asking is that we get included more in the process and be allowed to provide feedback and ideas that would help to improve the plans for everyone in Lake Forest Park. The kinds of revisions to the plans that would help us to save our trees would also help the other homeowners, like the elderly couple who spoke so movingly at the meeting this afternoon, as well as the dozens and dozens of homeowners who weren't able to attend that meeting or possibly this one because they have other obligations. The communication needs to take place, and I need my trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexia. Apologize, we're getting a little feedback here. Let's go to the next person, Paula Good. Paula, can you hear us? Need to unmute yourself, Paula. Paula, you're still muted. There you go.
There you go. I'm
Hi.
sorry. I'm so sorry. Oh my goodness.
Oh, no problem. Good evening.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So, of course, I'm right on the very beginning of the bus route. And I sit here and I watch the buses go by, and we don't have any people on the buses. So bus drivers come into the store and they buy their coffee and they remark on how they maybe only have one rider all day. So I would like Sound Transit to take a look at their model and maybe rethink, is this really a good idea? I think that transit and people working from home have changed the way that, I don't know, people go to and from work. For us in particular, we have a different consideration. We have not only trees, we have salmon stream, and we have a very steep, soft slope. So for us, we're perched on the edge of a precipice. That means that we have 100 feet down from the surface of the road down to the stream. The stream has been designated a salmon stream by WashDOT, and we have a lot of trees. We have trees, we have wildlife, we have eagles, we have, you know, other falcons and birds like that. And I do agree that Sound Transit has not been forthcoming. They will come by and they will say, well, what are your questions? But they never provide answers. So they've been very agreeable about coming out, but they want to do this big, large thing. They want to come across the creek. They want to drop a big fat drill rig down to the salmon stream. And I guess I'm concerned about that because I agree with my neighbors that the trees are very important. We have a lot of trees on our property, but I'm also concerned about the soft slope and the reinforcement of that. And they say, well, we can't touch the King County housing. We can't because that 155th on the west side is too steep. But in effect, they could probably link 155th to 35th very easy and not have to damage our side of the street. And what I mean by that is when you're coming across, you're going to be removing a lot of trees. You're going to be damaging salmon stream. And not only that, we have 100 feet from the surface of the road down to the salmon stream. We have soft slope, we have sandy soil. They want to take my parking lot. They want to take my tenants' parking. They want to take the billboard down. And they isolate us, and they don't want to talk to multiple people, multiple groups. So I would agree with my neighbors. And I don't have any answers after almost 2 years of trying to communicate with Yvonne and the group. So they come by, they say, oh, let's talk to you. Let's hear what you have to say. But they do not give any answers. They isolate all of the neighbors. That's my experience. And I don't even see anybody on the bus. So I would like Sound Transit to reinforce the reason why they need to put transit through this corridor when people work from home and they don't need the bus like they did before.
Thank you very much, Paula. Next, we have someone hasn't renamed themselves, but taking a risk here. And Matt, if it's something untoward, you can please mute them. With the initials DN. Again, I've requested that you use your name, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's David Newman, N-E-W-M-A-N. I'm sorry.
Thank you, David. I just want to make sure we don't have any untoward people out there making some rude comments. So
Understand perfectly.
Please continue.
Yeah, just quickly, I don't have anything prepared. I live just up the hill on 38th Avenue from the road. I'm here basically to support my neighbors and tell them, well, now the two representatives from the agency who came, they're just, this is already happening. They just came to inform us. So there really isn't any issue here or way here to stop this from happening. It sounds like. So I really don't know what to say. Anyway, thank you for hearing my concern there.
Thank you for commenting tonight, David. Appreciate it. And then we have Jeff Snedden. Mr. Snedden. Did we lose you? I think we lost Mr. Snedden. I'm going to move on to Barb S., and I suspect that's our friend, Ms. Sharkey. Barb, can you hear us? There you go.
I didn't know how to unmute myself. Yes, Barb Sharkey. And I didn't know how to rename myself either. I just found out that my family was actually Mennonite back in the old days, and it explains so much about me in terms of technology. Really, I'm just really a basic, very simple person. But anyway, and I don't have a prepared speech, and I don't have a poster. I have nothing prepared. But since August of 2017, which is when I first became aware of all this and tried to stir up, the people in our neighborhood, the Sheridan Beach neighborhood. And I think we have at least 30 people on each side of the road, 30 houses. And if 43 are involved, I'm sure that's a whole bunch of them. And I'm not sure the exact distance from the mall up to McDonald's. I think it's a mile or maybe a little over a mile. But my question has been and still is, what is the point? What is the point of all of this effort, all of this deconstruction, the trees and everything else, but people's backyards, to get buses up the hill a little bit faster when you are going to get to that corner and turn and have complete gridlock getting across 145th? I mean, it just, for me, it would be, show me what you're doing on 145th, fix 145th in the corner first, and convince me that it is worth it to do all this effort on Bothell Way. Because I just, as Mr. Troy and somebody else have pointed out, we've got pretty good width already. They, Metro, I think some years ago had already bought property on that west side, I believe, 96 or something like that. People lost a little bit of their backyards. You know, so they've already taken some, and it, especially when you just talk about how many poles you're moving. Anyway, it just seems like a lot of effort. And as other people pointed out, the buses are empty, and you know, what's going to happen at the corner with the McDonald's. And when that storage unit went in and got built, you know, right on the sidewalk, I just thought, that's very interesting. So anyway, that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Barb. I think we'll try Mr. Snedden again. He's rejoined us there. Jeff, can you hear us?
Yes, hello.
Good evening.
You can hear me, great.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I seem to be challenged to find the unmute button. Anyway, I'm speaking as much to the council as I am to Sound Transit. There's a question our residents have for Sound Transit. Is this pain worth the gain? It seems logical the construction of an additional bus lane will result in increased commuter traffic in our neighborhoods as commuters seek to avoid the inevitable backups caused by the construction project. And when work is completed, new commuters driving to LFP to catch a bus will have to park on nearby neighborhood streets, in many cases near school, until the proposed parking ramp is done in 2024. Add the loss of 500 trees, 41 properties and homes, and impacts on businesses in our community along the route. This project is not going to have a positive impact for our city. Residents familiar with this stretch of highway see that buses run virtually empty and car traffic at peak times. That seems far below pre-pandemic levels. We see many people and talk to many people, office workers who are now working several days a week from home. And we have read news articles about this trend, some specific to Seattle, indicating an impact on traffic. I believe there are deep concerns in our community about the need for this specific work on our 1.5 miles of highway. Sound Transit should provide information, empirical data, so we can clearly understand what the impacts will be. Here are some of the questions I've heard asked. What is the trend in peak weekday hours for bus boardings, pre-pandemic to now? What are the future projections after the construction? What is the trend in peak weekday car travel flow, pre-pandemic to now? What are the future projections? How much traffic during the construction will be diverted away from construction onto our neighborhood streets during peak hours? What is the current peak weekday commute time from LFP to downtown, pre-pandemic and now? What are future projections? After the construction, how many incremental commuters will opt to drive to one of our bus stops to catch the bus during peak hours? And what are future projections? How many will be able to park at town center? And how many forced to park on nearby streets, neighborhood streets? How many parking spots are planned for the parking ramp? How does this section of work meaningfully contribute to the overall goals of Sound Transit? Put it another way, quantify the positive impact we are contributing specifically, and what is lost if this project isn't done. It is in the best interest of Sound Transit and our council to provide our citizens with a more comprehensive, data-driven story about why we should enthusiastically embrace this project. I will do what I can do to work with neighbors, friends, and various LFP organizations to raise awareness of these issues and a desire to have a complete story so we can all embrace this work. Hopefully, Sound Transit will be able to provide this information. Convince us that the pain is worth the gain. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Moving on here, we have Vicky Scurry. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Vicky.
Yes, that is correct. And I just want to talk a little bit about the noise, because I lived on 39th Avenue Northeast for over 15 years. And the noise was pretty bad, but the idea of taking out all the trees on the west side of Bothell Way and not replacing anything there except a chain link fence is, to me, unthinkable. I work in transportation. I work for communities to create amenity to make the impact of transportation projects that are designed by engineering teams humanized. When I saw your plans, I decided to move. And I'm here now to fight for my community, to make sure that they get the benefit of equity, of sound mitigation, of mitigation to the environment and to the animals and fauna and everything that lives there. And I'm concerned because this just seems like a big push coming through without really looking at the intricate details of our lives, our community, and our city. You're turning Lake Forest Park into a drive-through with concrete retaining walls that go up 20 feet, drop down, and basically are trimmed with black chain link fence. To me, it seems very unacceptable. And I just want to make that point. And I hope that you'll respond and address these concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki, and thank you for your earlier emails. One more here, I believe. David Moss. Welcome, David.
Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I joined late, so I haven't heard everyone's comments. I did want to add that we're recent additions to the community. We moved to Sheridan Heights this spring, have loved the community, and feel like this is a very significant change to the nature of the community that's really not based on what I've learned in recent weeks, adequately taken into account fundamental changes to commute patterns, to communities that have happened and are still happening as a result of changing workplaces and commutes. And I'm an example of that. I used to work downtown. I now work on the other side of the lake, and my commute's different. And I work from home some days, and the commute patterns everyone is adjusting. And the idea of making a fundamental change to a community when we don't even know, when we're still shaking out what commute patterns will look like, feels like just a horrible sacrifice for our neighborhood, in service of something that's not yet clear in terms of the future of where people move for work. And that's what this is. It's a public transit change of pretty significant magnitude for our community. I think that I've heard it referred to as just potentially like a scar across the middle of our community to just carve open more space, take down trees. I mean that is, and I heard it from Dale, and I've heard it from so many people in our community. That's what makes our community what it is. It's beautiful here. And to allow a decision about commuting that was made in an entirely different time to sort of tear down what makes our community beautiful feels like we really need to pause and reassess and allow for the future of travel patterns to dictate those sorts of decisions instead of just sort of energy, inertia, and movement of the government, which I personally feel like I understand why that happens sometimes, but we need to pause as a community and push back, because a decision from years ago is no longer valid. It just isn't, and it would be, from my perspective, really an injustice to the community to allow it to proceed without a reassessment. I mean, we're in a different time now. So that's my view as a new member of the neighborhood. I love this community. It's a great community, and I hope we stand up to keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and welcome to the community. Appreciate your comments. We have an addition here. Bud Holmesy. Welcome, Bud.
Thank you. I just have a few comments. It's basically a plea for help. Sound transit plans are deeply flawed. There's a sidewalk to nowhere. This sidewalk, the noise levels have been measured at 90 decibels. To build a sidewalk on 522 is a public health hazard. We've talked about the bus staging areas in the middle of a residential zone. There'll be noise, illumination, literally hundreds of trees taken down. With all due respect, I found the sound transit presentation this evening a little insulting, that the gentleman would show up without an answer to that basic question about how many trees are going to be taken down and what mitigation will be made. That number has been, that's Sound Transit's number, not our number. And he didn't appear to have any kind of response to that. People have already mentioned insensitivity, outrageous insensitivity to the nature of Lake Forest Park. We're not Lake City, we're not Bothell, but we're going to be Bothelized if this project goes forward. Finally, I find Sound Transit absolutely tone deaf. I've been to many meetings, multiple meetings, making these points that other people have made. And everybody, the usual response is, well, we'll get back to you on that, but they don't. So why is this a plea for help? The council is our elected representatives. And as such, the council has the power of government with which to try to stop this lunacy. I ask you, the council, to try your best to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bud, for your thoughts. Is there anyone else out on the internet that would like to make public comment? If you would like to do so, please use the raise hand function. Yes, Krista Fisher. Welcome, Krista.
Hello, this is Elliot Fisher, Krista Fisher's son.
Welcome, Elliot.
Krista's with me, along with Scott, my father. I'm a resident at 16274 39th Avenue Northeast in Sheridan Heights, property that abuts the proposed project. I just want to say that a close friend of mine moved to Lake Forest Park from out of state. They selected Lake Forest Park after scanning through satellite images of Seattle's suburbs on Google Maps and being attracted to the exceptional green space they saw from above, and that's Lake Forest Park. But if we allow agencies like Sound Transit to unilaterally remove hundreds of trees at a time, it won't be forever. So I'd just like to take a brief moment to remind our fellow citizens and neighbors of some relevant sections of the Lake Forest Park Municipal Code governing tree removal. In particular, you can read in detail, and I suggest you do, Chapter 16.14 on tree canopy preservation and enhancement. In particular, 16.14 subsection 060 prohibits removal of trees that are considered in section B viable exceptional trees, which has a definition. There are many viable exceptional trees along the stretch of road that Sound Transit proposed to extend into our properties. And I just want to make sure that the citizenry and my fellow neighbors are aware that there is Lake Forest Park Municipal Code that describes this in some detail. So thank you for your time. Thank you everyone for your participation this evening. I'm looking forward to continued interaction with Sound Transit to reduce tree removal where possible, and improve sound mitigation.
Thank you very much, Elliot. Appreciate your comment. Is there anyone else out there that would like to provide public comment at this time? Please use the raise hand function. I'll give it a second and then we'll close public comment. Okay, it looks like we're done. And I just wanted to say in closing, thank you all for very thoughtful comments. I know our guests here tonight will take that with them, and we will all look forward to increased communication and participation in the process that's unfolding here. With that, I'm going to close public comment. I don't have a gavel, so I'll use my broken knuckle here. And colleagues, if it's amenable to you, I think we should probably take about a 5-minute recess. We've been at this for 3 hours and 20 minutes. Is that acceptable? Okay, yes. We're recessed for 5 minutes. Well, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for your patience. As I indicated, we've been going since 6 and getting a little bit glued to our seats here, so we had to get up and move about a bit. So here we are. We are at, goodness, we're at the consent calendar. Imagine that. I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Consent calendar passes unanimously. Thank you very much, everyone. We are on to item 8, ordinances and resolutions for introduction and referral. Resolution 1858, interlocal agreement regarding the design improvements for the 25th Avenue Northeast Ballinger Creek habitat restoration and flood reduction process. And this is Director Perigo. Hi, Jeff. Welcome.
Wait, I know how to clear a room, don't I?
For those of you out in the on the internet, the room is now empty, except for staff.
Matt, when you have a second, if you could throw up the map for me, I appreciate that. Tonight before us is going to be the first touch for an ILA between City of Shoreline and Lake Forest Park. The City of Shoreline's been the lead agency developing the 25th Avenue Ballinger Creek Restoration and Flood Reduction Project. The purpose of the project is to daylight and restore habitat along a pipe stream, install 4 fish passable and habitat friendly box culverts, and restore a graded open channel that runs along an impacted WashDOT infrastructure. These improvements will also address longstanding and frequently recurring stream flooding issues near the intersection of SR 104 and 195th Street in Lake Forest Park. The primary element within the City of Lake Forest Park included in this design under the ILA is the culvert that runs under Northeast 195th Street, which runs parallel to SR 104. The culvert appears to be undersized and needs replacement. Shoreline's design consultant has completed 60% project plans thus far. At this time, what we're seeking is an agreement with the City of Shoreline to equally share the costs associated with the WashDOT's expense for reviewing and commenting on the submitted engineering plans, completing agreements, meetings, and inspections. And that is the capacity in which we're looking to seek at this with this ILA. Again, this is just the first touch, and the value of the review is expected to be around 15,000. So we'd share 50-50 with Shoreline, and then we'd subsequently come back for design and construction at later dates. So that's it in a nutshell. So a little bit shorter than the previous presentations.
Thank you, Jeff, for your brevity. We do appreciate it. Colleagues, questions?
Just a quick question. Do we see the value of the construction to be roughly 50-50? The reason I'm asking is, does it represent a fair value of proportionment of cost?
Are you referring to the review at 50-50?
Well, the review is 50-50, but I was wondering if the value of the project is to be shared 50-50.
No, it's not going to be 50-50. Our portion will be primarily the culvert and any other amenities within the City of Lake Forest Park.
So I guess I'm wondering is, should we share 50-50 or proportionate of the value of the work?
It'll be isolated to the culvert cost as well as anything else within the city. The Shoreline project themselves is further north, which includes a lot of items that are within the City of Shoreline. So that's going to be split by the city boundary.
Yes, Ms. Pratt.
I just wanted to add, I've been in on some of these conversations with Shoreline, and as the ILA points out, Shoreline has carried 100% of the cost of this design and hiring the experts to this point. So just so they have done 100% of that.
Okay, thank you for that. Colleagues, other questions for Director Perigo or Kim? But as this is the first touch, we'll be seeing it again in October.
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much, Director Perigo. And we have next, we're on to ordinances and resolutions for council discussion. I believe Director Vaughn has ordinance 1249, amending chapter 13.08 of the Lake Forest Park Municipal Code, sewer service and use regarding rates. Welcome, Director Vaughn.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor and Council. So to briefly go over this item for a second touch, all that's being requested within this ordinance change is to change the code to remove the language that it's adopted for the sewer rate. I should back up. To change the language for the sanitary sewer service, stating that it's adopted by the city council in the city's biennial budget document, and change the language to being more transparent to the council and the community, restating that it is established by city council resolution.
So it's simply, we would define this as more of a housekeeping item to change the language in the code in an effort to be more transparent, to follow our current practice that we actually do go through on an annual and a biennial basis through the budget process. But therefore just amend our code to reflect exactly the practice that we do complete during our budget process. And that pretty much sums up this item. Are there any questions?
Colleagues, questions, thoughts? Yes, Mr. Fertani, go ahead.
Thanks for your presentation, Director Vaughn. Just to clarify, all of the other rates are set in the manner that's prescribed by this legislation.
Yes, all rates are currently set by resolution for the city. So it would be following our current practice and procedure. And again, just amending the current language in our code to follow suit with what we currently do as a practice.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman. Yes, Councilman Riddle.
Just a clarification that currently we typically do a consolidated resolution to cover kind of umbrella of a lot of these rate changes. It could be falling under that same consolidated resolution, or would it want to be a separate one?
It could follow under what we would define as like the user fee schedule. But as far as if we are changing a sewer rate, it would be more likely that we would pull it out, and it would also be included on a user fee schedule. But in addition, I would probably, as just a good practice and transparency, pull it out and have it stand as its own resolution so that it's adopted separately. And then in addition, it will show on a user fee schedule for that appropriate that future fiscal year. And then also in addition, you would be also technically adopting it within the budget. So you're technically adopting it in multiple places, but it would be separated out, and we probably would just not have it stand alone on a user fee schedule. In addition, it would be a standalone item for sewer because it's the city sewer and in addition, the King County portion for the sewer.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure we had that transparency and it didn't get buried in a different document.
And that is, again, back to past practice has always been that since I have been here and prior to me, but per the way that it is stated in the actual code and ordinance right now, it is in the city's best interest to update to reflect what we currently are doing as our practice, to be more transparent.
Colleagues, any other additional comments or questions? I just want to say thank you. The legal geek in me loves it when we do housekeeping on these things to reflect current practices. So thank you for doing this. And all right, so we'll move on. And Dr. Calvin is up, I think, here for Ordinance 1250, adoption of the 2018 International Building Code and other construction-related codes. Mr. Kilman, welcome.
I think there's just a couple of you that were here for the last code update I did, and I like to use the board to kind of give you an idea of how everything works.
Right.
Because I like to draw.
There you go.
So anyways, the first thing I wanted to get to was the 2018 Energy Code. I heard from Council Member Lebo not too long ago when I was talking to him about it, that it was real tough. It is real tough. It's spendy too. The code's broken down into, I don't know, you have maybe 12 different options you can go, but what they leave out, well, let me go back. You need 6 credits for a single family home, and I'm talking just single family home or a multi, to qualify to even get through plan review on the prescriptive method of the energy code. Now to get 6 credits, it's real difficult. Okay. a heat pump's worth 1, and then you've got to use all these different insulated values, low E values on the windows. It's real tough. It's real tough on builders. And the commercial end of it's even worse. So, but that being said, I'll put it this way. Most of the submittals I have that come into the city, most are all under the 2018 Energy Code. They all comply with more than, well, at least more than 6 credits on single family homes. That includes the customs that I have, any of the single family homes. The additions, you can go, I think it's 450 square feet, then you really don't, you just comply with the prescriptive requirements. You don't have to meet any credits under that section. But anything above that, then you do, and I think it's 3 credits for that. So I'm just trying to briefly explain the energy code out the best I can without making it really complex, because it is complex. You know, your floor values have gone up from an R30, 38 to now an R49. Ceiling insulation, R49. Your walls are still R21. The glazing is a low E value of 28, which typically is about 35, maybe 40. Okay, so any questions on the energy code?
Colleagues, questions about the energy code? Councilmember Riddle.
Just a question about the size, sort of scale by the size. Where would our ADUs sizing come into that energy code?
They fall under the square footage. If you're, an ADU is considered a single family residence, period. If you are under, let me think here, sorry. I'm pretty sure it's 1,400 square feet. You have to be 3 or 4 credits.
Okay.
So you'd still comply with that. The thing is like everybody, they're trying to get away from fossil fuels.
Absolutely.
You know, when you do like when I do the review of all the single family homes, very rarely now will I see anything with gas fuel in it. They might have a furnace in there, but pretty much everybody's, at least the single family homes, are all heat pumps, whether they're ductless or whatever. So they're trying to get away from that one. So anyways, now I'm going to jump to some of my favorite stuff here. Basement occupancy, stuff like that, some of the changes that are in the code, and I got to move real quick, so forgive me. One of the sections in the code on basements that they're coming up with now, that get it on. Oops. You have a basement, sorry, it's supposed to be square, an R3 occupancy. Got the door to the outside egress. Got bedroom. I know there's a few council members that know this. Typically, you would have to have some type of egress on. Now, what the code is doing now, they're saying, if you sprinkle that basement, you have one egress door out of here, you don't need these egress windows anymore. You still need them for natural daylight, but you don't have to meet the threshold of 44 inches from the finished floor. So again, if you sprinkle your basement, you don't have to have the egress. That's all part of the new code. Townhouse separation. I'm gonna jump around on you, so you gotta come to me, please do. Townhouse separation, we had a lot of that up at Pulte with the 12 degrees north site. And when I did the review on them, between our 2 occupancies, which are, oops, there we go again, multifamily, we allowed them to go 2 1-hour walls. Okay. Now, this is your wood, this is your sheetrock, system, your floor system, etc. Now the code is saying you could go 1, 2-hour wall. Just double sheetrock. Or, yeah, or you can go 1 hour wall. I think that's 3/4 separation. I take that back. But anyways, then you've got a sprinkle. Now, an R2 occupancy would be sprinkled anyways, but we're talking townhomes. An R2 occupancy is a live work occupancy. Your mixed use occupancy meaning office and living. Does that make sense to anybody at home? Sure.
Calvin, question about the single wall versus the double wall.
Yeah,
I know one of the pieces about the double wall, if something were to happen to one building, it wouldn't impact the second building. Is the sprinkler supposed to like protect that wall to keep the structure in place?
no, that firewall is giving you that separation, fire separation time.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So between the units, you're going to have a 2-hour separation. Basically, they call it a 2-hour time, basically fire burn time. It's all been studied that way. Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Goldman,
Oh.
please.
Yes, so I live in one of those townhouses
Yeah.
in 12 Degrees North. Should I be concerned that they no longer meet specifications? Just on like a personal level?
No, they still have 2-hour walls between them.
Okay,
Yeah, no. You still meet those same specifications.
good to know. Thanks.
Yeah, they're giving you more options now than they did before. One of those, and probably one of the units you live in, is probably, your unit's probably not sprinkled.
No.
Okay, so if if the builder wanted to go with a 1-hour wall and fully sprinkle the entire building, he could. That stays the 2-hour separation.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay.
So Calvin, on the fire code, I notice it revises explosive storage. Does that include Councilmember Furtani's rocket fuel?
Not an explosive.
Very stable. Unlike Colin.
I'll leave that for you two to work out.
One of the biggest ones I have with problems here is when I go to a homeowner and I got some wise mechanical contractor comes in and I've got a decorative appliance, not a wood burning stove, but a decorative appliance. It's like this. And I've got my gas shut off here. I tell them, guys, that gas shut off will be in the same room as that appliance. And I've had people argue with me about that. And I show them in the code that it's under the decorative appliance section of the code. And they go, oh, wow. So you'll see this in a lot of the existing homes. I've been here 18 years. It's so I've been enforced it that way. But yeah, now the code also says in the mechanical code, if you've got, let's say, a gas stove, and you've got your gas line and your hookup. Now they're basically saying it has to be readily movable. It can't be so heavy that you can't move it to access that gas shut off valve. Because that's another language that they added. Sorry about my drawing here. How did that start?
It must be getting late. It must be getting late.
Calvin,
Yes.
quick question. Does that new code allow for like a remote shut off valve, like in another room, or does it still have to be with,
Gonna be right there.
has to be in the same room, but more readily accessible?
Yeah, I get it all the time down at the beachfront where people go, I don't want a key valve in my fireplace. And I walk through with them and I got this contractor says, come with me. And I go outside. He put the gas shut off valve on the outside of the chimney. Looking at him going, really? Can't be serious. needs to be inside the same room, readily accessible. So,
Makes sense.
all right. Stop laughing. All right, here's another kind of, I'm trying to, you have to forgive me, I'm skipping through a lot of things here. Ventilation of residential and multifamily homes. Crawlers, I'm sorry, crawl spaces. Typically, you have a vent, one in every 150 square feet. Cross ventilation, meaning it runs through to the other side. Doesn't mean you put one here and one over here to do this. I've been teaching people this for years and I still get into it. That being said, the code says now what they've added, you can have a crawler without any vents as long as you put a dehumidifier in there, but it's got to be permanently wired in to run all the time. So, interesting. Yeah. I don't like that one too much, but it's an option.
Alvin, is that for energy efficiency? I mean,
No, it's just to keep the crawl space dry.
no, I mean, for removing the vents, not having vents, it seems like.
No, there's, I don't know why people would want to ventilate the crawler. I don't.
Okay.
You see a lot of the older homes. But if you look at a lot of the newer homes that I've been inspecting around here for years, they have good cross-free ventilation. I have seen where people have gone through and plugged those vents up from the inside. Full buttons and all those things. Try to explain it. Really show.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyways, okay. Makeup there. I don't know how many of you know much about. I know you do.
Houses that are
The
too tight.
mechanical code says, oh God, I gotta use this board, sorry. If you have a fan over 400 CFM, you have to provide some type of makeup air to this code. Now what that means, and it's the best way to explain it, years ago when I was a young inspector, and I'm talking years ago, I actually went in the house in another jurisdiction. I was with the building official. And we stood back. The folks had put in a 650 CFM fan over their fancy stove. I'm standing probably 10 feet back away from the hood. He takes the lighter, he stands with the lighter, turns that hood on. That flame went right up that hood. That's now makeup air evens that flow out. There's a number of ways of doing it. But the duct that goes to the outside runs, and this evens the flow. Now it's saying that you can come back over here, have a duct to the outside or something that's run off of, when this comes on, this opens, this lets air into the room, evening that airflow out. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
I have it.
Yes, sir.
I have it.
You have it?
Oh,
do you have
yeah.
makeup air on your place?
Yeah, it's connected to our furnace.
Oh.
Yeah.
I got a 390 CFM hood.
No, I have about a 900. Yeah. So when it's cold out, you heat the makeup air.
Oh, here's a good break for a lot of you guys. Balconies and decks, these are always my favorite. If I have a commercial occupancy, my floor load is 100 pounds per square foot. Okay, that is, let's just put it as a B occupancy, which is a business. My house occupancy is 40 pounds per square foot. Now, if I want to put a deck on any of these now, that load has to be 1.5 times that load. Whereas before, it used to be a 60 pound, because if you go 1.5 times 40, that comes out to 60 pounds per square foot. 100 pounds, blah, 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 it's 150. Anyhow, Now the balconies are designed above and beyond what the design load is for the inside of the building. It's always 1.5 of that. So if I've got 100 pounds per square foot of load on my floor in a, say, a commercial building, now I have my deck balcony has to be 150 pounds per square foot. Yeah, that's why decks are 60, basically 1.5 of 40. Okay. Did I lose y'all yet? Oops. Another one. I'm sorry I'm drawn and tell me if it's not readable, please. I'm trying to get a lot in really quick here. My big thing is lateral restraint panels. I know Councilman Lebo would know about that. In garages, in areas, if we follow the prescriptive approach, and let's say the IRC, the code says you can design a panel. Usually they're 24 to 18 inches wide, depending on whatever application it is. Got your plate, your bolts. This has to be scatter nailed up every stud all the way to the end. And then the header is nailed across. Okay, now that's for lateral strength. A lot of people, though, they design these. Now, engineers design it just about like this, but they end up with pull downs in here. Like an HPA or an HDA, those are pull downs. And, but the main thing is that the code is saying this panel needs to be completely sheathed from edge to edge. And every nail, every stud has to be caught in here, or nail guns.
And that's to stabilize the large openings of like a garage door opening.
Yes, yeah, or where you have windows too close to, you know, the edge of a house or something like that.
I have that too.
There's a whole formula that you use. Okay, one of the things in the code that I like to go over is fire protection. Well, it's really life safety. Any house now in the code, if you have a bedroom, sorry, terrible writing here. And let's say you have a gas-fired appliance or decorative appliance in this room. The code says you need to have a CO2 detector in that room. And that also has to go downstairs too. You would have a smoke detector. Now they make the mixed CO2 and smoke detectors together. They're all interconnected. So if they go off, you'll hear it.
To clarify, deep carbon dioxide or monoxide?
Carbon dioxide. Monoxide. Okay. Should go over some structural stuff with you. There's so much to go over here. I'm trying to keep with the very basic things. One of the other ones that probably, I don't know how interested you guys would be in a crawl space of a resident or multifamily home. Some of these houses here in LFP, I go in there and I've got a hot water tank and a furnace in the crawl space. Code requires now that you physically put a fire barrier up on the bottom side of your floor joisting. Really, I call it trying to, you know, when you take your subfloor, You can figure this out typically under some NER ratings or some of the other ones to see what kind of rating you get. But you're basically trying to protect that floor if these go up. Sleeping yet? Not at Councilman Lebo would kind of like this one a little bit, I think, being an architect. The code has changed the occupancy. Our occupant load for a B occupancy was 100 square feet. So that's basically a 10 by 10 area that you figure that's your occupant. There's one occupant. Well, the code just changed that. Now it's 150 square feet. So you get a little more leeway there. 10 by 15 area versus a 10 by 10 area. Yeah. Major voice. I know I'm working with one of the council members, actually do an elevator at all. And my big thing is fire protection on those. And if you're in that elevator, you want to make sure you're protected against smoke. The way to do that is usually with a seal around the door. If that door closes, it's a fire seal. That door closes to protect the people that are within that shaft. And that to me, hers is a 1 hour shaft. So I mean, it's fire protected on all sides. You guys are seeing a lot of solar panels going up. What a lot of people don't understand is that when I review these, if I've got a roof, I have to leave room for a firefighter to walk across this ridge of 36 inches, 18 this way, and then typically 36 up one side. I'm sorry, can you read that? I'm sorry.
No, it's interesting.
So in other words, you
Makes
can
sense.
get up, firefighter can get up here and walk all around these solar panels. Now, if you've got a valley in here, I got the valley backwards, I'm sorry. There you go. You still have to do something to give the firefighter the room he needs to get around on top of that roof. Majority of the time, they're not really wanting to get up on a roof anyways. So whenever I go out, we get a lot of solar panels here. I've got to make sure I've got fire protection there, all of that. So. Any questions so far? I'm sorry. I know I'm going fast and I apologize.
I'm good.
Anyone?
One of the ones that still gets to me is when I go out to do a mechanical inspection and I've got my liner that's running from the, let's say, the furnace. That duct comes back through, goes through the ceiling assembly, then back through the roof assembly. The code now requires at this point that this is a protected shield in here. End of discussion. And I've seen a lot of homes here in LFP over the years where there is no protection there. And I've seen a single wall B vent going through a ceiling. And a single wall B vent has not been acceptable in years. It's too hot. Joke. So The other thing too with smoke alarms, the code gives me the power if I've got, let's say someone does an addition to the house. It's a small enough addition, or let's say they alter, I'll use the basement, they alter their basement. Do I have to make them put a full smoke alarm, CO2 alarm that are all interconnected in the power? No, not in a remodel like that. I can make them put in battery, as long as they have a CO2 and smoke sensor. That's pretty much it. Additions. One thing I can't remember which council member I talked to. The question came up about the electric vehicle charging stations in new single family homes. It looks like that's probably going to happen in the July 23. I'm sorry. And in that, in each garage for one space, you would have one, I think it's 40 amp circuit for that one station in the garage. Single family. That would be outside. They're not requiring them outside on R3 occupancies. They are requiring them on multifamily and bigger parking lots and all that stuff, commercial. So yeah. Any questions so far? Alex? Oh?
No.
Okay, one of the other things furnaces. Typically, if I've got a furnace in a closet, there are clearances that are required in the mechanical code. Typically, it depends. And then an accessible door so you can pull the thing out and work on it. Well, the code came in and I said, no, install it per the manufacturer's instructions. So in other words, whatever clearances I have on that unit, they can follow. See, so. I'm running all over. Yes.
I do have a quick question. I'm appreciating your approach to this because, different topics, very interesting. The particular one I'm interested in is the EV chargers. A 40 amp circuit, is there enough capacity in most homes to just add another 40 amp circuit in?
I'm sorry.
Is there a capacity in a home, in a standard LFP home, to add another 40 amp circuit in?
Well, in the code, it'd be required in a single family home. Is it now? Depends on what kind of service you've got.
Right.
200 or 400 amp. Most of the homes around here are 200 amp.
Right, which is a huge chunk then, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay, thanks.
all these things are coming up with, like getting rid of fossil fuels and all that. They're great. I think they're cool, but the cost to the builder build these things, and then the cost of sale. The houses are going to have to sell for more because no one's going to want gas fuel. So anyhow, all right. One of my other ones that I've had to point out to other inspectors, mostly in other jurisdictions, if I've got a door, and I've got glass here, and I've got glass here, which you see a lot. The code allows this door to open, but you have to be 24 inches away, and this is safety glass. I mean, in other words, if it's any closer than 24 inches, it's safety glass. Now the code's now saying is when that door opens on the opposite side, one side, if it's fixed glass, doesn't have to be safety glass. Now, when it closes, that other side's got to be safety glass. So it's a little bit confusing. And if you have a sliding door, say French doors, excuse my. If you have a French door, which we did a lot of. Let's say you've got a window here, French doors here. If this is fixed glass, the code says, guess what? That doesn't need to be safety glass. This does, right here. That makes sense? Hey, anything else? Anybody? Any questions, anything I can answer on anything above and beyond what we've talked about so far?
Anyone questions? Yeah, Councilmember Lebo.
I very much appreciate the description, and I'm glad to see that Lake Forest Park has someone so skilled in the new code as you, Calvin. So it's refreshing because I've seen some of those issues that you pointed out, and I'm glad you're all over it. Mine actually have to do with the proposed, what do we call it?
I'm sorry.
The proposed ordinance. And we talked about this before, and that is to have some sort of grace period where both codes would be acceptable. I think we talked about a
Yeah, we
6
did.
month. And the other was, I wasn't tracking, and maybe I wasn't tracking why we needed to put the fire code in its entirety into the Lake Forest Park Municipal Code, because I didn't see any relevant.
There's really not.
There's not, and
There's nothing there, Councilmember, that really affects us.
I thought we could just do it by reference like we do all the other codes.
Yeah.
I think the reason that was done was to show edits and track changes to the fire code. To actually show you the changes would have been very hard to read because there was a lot of them. I mean, you don't have to adopt it. We could just do it by reference, but we were repealing and adopting and attaching it.
So when I
that
looked
way.
at the revised fire code, there's only like one section that's underlined. And it appears that we could just adopt it by reference because anybody who's doing this would go and read the fire code as by reference.
I think the last time though that the city adopted the fire code, it made quite a few amendments. And so the one in our code is different.
Oh,
And so that's why it was easier for us to just adopt and repeal.
sure.
We could just adopt and repeal and do a reference. We don't have to attach it to the ordinance, but that's why we did it.
I didn't see any amendments that we would adopt particular to the fire code, so I thought we could just do it by reference.
I leave that up to the fire official and you guys to decide what.
Because
If
by
you're gonna
reference,
amend the
it's the
fire
same
code.
thing.
I'm sorry, I missed the last thing you
By
said.
reference, it's the same thing. They have to follow it.
If we do it by reference or we attach it, yes, you're right. We don't have to attach it. We could just refer to it. Usually I'm getting the opposite is.
Well, I was trying to
give it
make our
me.
code smaller.
The
Fair enough.
attachment would not be in the code. It's just in the ordinance, but
Oh,
we can just do it by reference.
All right, colleagues, other questions? We have one more. We actually have to take action on another item later, so.
Are you guys good with me?
Any other questions, comments?
just that,
Email me,
Thank you.
gladly. Wish I would add pictures to show you.
No, it's good.
oh, it was very informative,
Yeah,
so I
thank
very
you.
much appreciated it.
Yeah, thanks, Calvin.
Thanks, Calvin.
We Appreciate it.
Matt, thanks for the board.
I like
Right.
seeing the whiteboard in action, drawing on it.
Yeah, it's impressive. Okay. Let's see, we have ordinances, and resolutions for action. Somebody needs to wake up Andy. Is Andy sleeping? There's Andy. All right, you're still awake.
I'm here.
Mr. Sylvia, welcome. Thanks for your patience. We have before us Resolution 1857, authorizing the mayor sign an agreement with AQUALIS for 2022 stormwater system cleaning. And we've touched on this a couple times before, at least once before, right?
No.
No.
Liz first.
Yeah, this is the, I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was confusing with something else. Please go ahead.
Yeah, this represents the introduction of this request to award the cleaning contract. And this is cleaning work that is ordered by the NPDES permit pursuant to inspections that we conducted earlier this year. And maybe that's what you're thinking about,
That's what I
because
was
there was a
thinking.
separate
Thank you.
contract.
Yeah.
Actually, the same vendor did the inspections for us. They happen to have been the low bidder on that work as well. So yeah, this is introducing it tonight and humbly requesting that you consider approving the request to award in fewer than the standard 3 touches. We are making that request for a few reasons. Well, actually, let me just give you a quick summary of what this contract is. So as I mentioned, we, per the terms of the NPDES permit, have to inspect essentially all of our municipal catch basins once every 2 years. We completed that work for the 2-year cycle that ended in 2021. This was back in February of this year. That was a little bit behind schedule, and we're similarly a little bit behind schedule to get the cleaning work that basically when you do these inspections, you have to follow a certain inspection standard. And if the inspection results exceed certain thresholds, then cleaning them is required. And so, we have, I think, 500 catch basins that met those criteria, per the inspections. And so this is the contract that is, was advertised, last month to get that cleaning work done. And so the execution of that cleaning work is also a requirement that the permit imposes. So it is work that is budgeted. We have sufficient budget within our surface water management fund to support the contract cost, and the sort of time sensitivity around it is basically, it's the work can be more efficiently performed in drier weather. And so again, ideally, we would have been able to get this thing on the street a little bit sooner, but I think, we are where we are in terms of, how long it took to get this thing out to bid and secure bids and present this request to you. And so it is, the more of the dry weather we can capture just sort of translates to less time that the trucks that clean these catch basins need to be spending operating in neighborhoods. And there's a bit of assistance that DPW is offering to this contractor for the sake of cost savings, which is that, we're providing them with access to a water supply up to twice a day. And so again, like the longer the duration of the cleaning takes, it's more time, a longer duration of time that they would have the, the right to sort of seek assistance from our staff. And so it's just an efficiency-based request to award it in fewer touches than the standard 3. So those are the I think the key points.
Great.
Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Andy. Council members, questions? Councilmember Lebo.
I'm fine moving this forward to contract with it. As Andy talks, getting this done in dry weather before the wet season starts is
Sure.
advantageous. So I'm fine moving it. A question though for you, Andy. As I read the contract, it's a not to exceed about $55,000, but it's a force account work. So how do you reconcile, or are you confident that you're not going to exceed the 55,000? Because as a force account work, they get 95% done and they're at $55,000. You have no more contract authority.
So there's one bid item that was set up to be paid. Sorry, say again?
Yeah, it's $1,000.
Right, so the base scope of work that we've identified here is, you know, there's, I'd say very low probability that we're going to use that $1,000 at all. That is for site conditions that may differ from the assumptions we've set in, you know, describing the site of this work and the, you know, the nature of the work, and is, you know, I think, you know, based on the notion that we're using the same vendor that completed the inspections and has familiarity with this site, how efficient they were in completing the first round of work, I'm not expecting that $1,000, I guess, contingency fund is going to get utilized much. But is there? I'm not sure if I'm addressing your concern about the budget implications. Is there?
I would generally see that there would be an authorization that has a contingency that's greater than the estimated amount. Because the other thing that's not here is just trying to understand as a policy, how do we manage that when you have a force account and a NTE amount? If you always finish under your NTE amount, you're fine. It's what do you do when you overrun it because you end up with more material, or it takes longer because there's a blockage that's much greater than you anticipated? If you always end up below your NTE, there's not an issue.
So I guess my expectation here is, you know, that $1,000, the $54,000 that represents the, you know, cost for, you know, the base scope of work. There's very little about that work that I see as being subject to change. I hope I'm not underestimating this, but it's I think we understand the scope of what has to happen out there pretty well, based on the thoroughness of you know, the inspection data we received during these inspections. And then that force account bid item, we would only authorize the use of that. I mean, we would have to present the contractor with an order for force account work. So we would, you know, they would, I think that the idea for the use of that $1,000 fund is they would identify something about a particular catch basin site that they think is, you know, deserving of a, you know, perhaps higher level of compensation, or, you know, than the price that they offered for, you know, for each of the base bid items, or there's something that there's a cleaning task that was not anticipated that we want to, while we have a contractor on site, execute. But I don't anticipate issuing the contractor orders to conduct work under that force account bid item if we're approaching that not to exceed limit. Like if there's work that would be nice to do during this contract, but it would require us to amend our contract amount, I'd say we're just going to have to reserve that work for a future contract.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Councilmember Riddle. Really losing my voice now.
Just a question, a couple questions. One, this is set to allow them to start within 10 days, complete within 45 working days. Are they ready? Do you know if they're able to mobilize within that 10-day or in that 10-day time?
That's the indication they've given me, yes.
Okay. And then the actual cleaning process, is it it's sort of open to their technique. Do you know if they're going to be using a vacuum? Is there any noise issues related with this process that you're aware of?
You know, they most likely will use those vacuum style trucks. I mean, that's the quickest way to, you know, remove the material to the extent that we specify that they have to remove it from the structures. I stopped short of requiring them to use a particular type of equipment. I set a performance standard, like what result do we want after their cleaning work is done, and it's up to them to determine the means and methods to get that work done. And they're also required, as all of our construction or vendors are, to abide by things like local ordinances, noise ordinances. They can't do the work before, I think it's 7 or 8 a.m. or after 8 or 9 p.m. So there's some amount of, or some degree of this type of work that may be noisy and is, unfortunately, I think necessary evil of it, but there's safeguards in place through our code to keep it from getting, I think, out of hand.
Councilmember
Thank you.
Goldman?
This may come across as pedantic. This inspection and cleaning process, is it twice a year or once every 2 years?
Once every 2 years.
Okay, because I had read it that biannual as meaning twice a year, so I was wondering why we didn't get this 6 months ago. Okay, but it is every 2 years.
Right. Am I
It's a word, I
hope I'm
think
using
I
the
always
language-
confuse biannual and biennial. But yeah, I warned you this was going to be
Yeah.
pedantic.
And I hope my understanding of it, like I know I get these mixed up sometimes too. Biannual I thought was every 2 years, and then semi-annual would be twice a year. Is that right? Or do I have it reversed?
That is how I think of it. But sometimes biennial can feel twice an annual or
No, you're-
twice annual. Yeah.
You're correct, Andy.
Well,
Council, what's your pleasure? I didn't-
Should we put it on the whiteboard? Do we need a map? I'm sorry. It's way too late.
I'd entertain a motion to suspend our rules.
Second.
Oh, you need a motion.
Right.
I move that we suspend the 3-touch rule to,
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of suspending our rules, please say
Aye.
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 Aye. Any nays? Guys have it. Thank you. And I'd entertain a motion to adopt resolution 1857. Resolution of the City Council of the City of Lake Forest Park, Washington, authorizing the mayor to sign a purchase service contract agreement with New Restoration and Recovery Services LLC DBA AQUALIS for 2022 stormwater system cleaning. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. Actually, if there is discussion, please go ahead. Anyone? All those in favor of the motion at hand, please say aye. Aye. Any nays? The ayes have it. Thank you, Mr. Sylvia. I appreciate your time at this late hour.
Thank you all. Appreciate your assist on this one.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Have a great rest of your evening. Take care.
Thanks, you too.
Okay, so is there any other business? No, okay. And then we have
Mr. Deputy Mayor, do you need to excuse anybody?
we do. That actually would fall under business. That's correct. I'd entertain a motion to excuse Councilmember Cassover as well as Councilmember Bodie.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of excusing Councilmember Bodie and Cassover, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay. It's 4 ayes when 1 recalcitrant nay, as is our tradition. Thank you, Councilmember Riddle. Let the record show that vote. Thank you. Council committee reports. Just a reminder, we do have, take a look at the budget calendar. Of course, we have quite a bit of meetings coming up here until the middle of November. And council member reports. Anybody have a tremendously brief council member report? Wow, okay. No
Save it
takers.
for the next one.
All right, yeah, I can also, and yeah, we can save it for the next one. And then the mayor's not here. There's not a mayor's report currently. City administrator's report is always in the packet. Thank you for the to the PD and
I was gonna do something on the whiteboard if you got about 30 minutes. Okay, I'm done.
I'm out of jokes, I'm sorry.
And a special thanks to the candy delivery.
Yeah.
Yes.
It has gotten us
Um,
through.
At the risk of delaying, can I, maybe other business, just ask a question to
You
the,
bet.
to the body?
Please.
So we heard a lot of public comment regarding Sound Transit tonight. And I'm wondering, is there something we want to do as a body at a future meeting regarding the feedback that we got tonight?
That is an excellent question. I think that there is, I think one of the things that came out of the conversation, if I may, the comments we heard is that I think we need to help the community understand better what we can actually do. First of all, I mean, what was within our authority, so to speak. And it is very clear that we need to continue, in my mind, that we need to continue to have this dialogue with Sound Transit and have them and lobby very hard for them to continue having robust or have robust conversations with the community, and particularly those that are affected most. I'm trying to think for future wise. I think, yeah, that's an excellent question. It's challenging because it was voted on by the majority of the voters, and so again, I didn't get into in my comments about the veracity of the decision to move forward. The question is, I think for this body, what can we do to encourage Sound Transit to minimize the impacts to every extent possible, not only in our natural environment, but primarily on the residents that are affected. So, Councilmember Furtani.
Might this be a topic for a future work session?
Yeah, we certainly could do that. And Administrator Hill and the mayor and Vice Chair Cassover and I can talk about that. Actually, she won't be back, but we can talk about that next week and see if we can find some time for that. Depending on the schedule. Yeah, that's an excellent point. I feel, to be honest with you, Larry, I feel a little helpless to in terms of what change we can affect, but let's do everything we possibly can. So thank you for the question. Any other thoughts, colleagues? Okay, with that, we are adjourned.